Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, May 14th, 2020. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Community Development Committee. I'd like to take a moment to recognize that we are gathered here on the traditional territory of the Seashelt and Squamish First Nations. We have an agenda in front of us. It's an amended agenda. We've got an item that has been deleted. We've got an additional piece that was a late item, which was the Item 19, Electoral Area A, APC minutes. And we've got addition of presentation material. Is there any other changes that anybody would like to make to the agendas? See, oh, Mayor, Director Seegers.
Thank you. So in the agenda, what I see is we actually have a presentation by one of the proponents, and then we're looking at actually removing that item from the agenda. So I'm a little confused as to how we're proceeding here. No, sorry, wrong one. Wrong one, different presentation. Sorry, excuse me. This all came at me at the last minute. I'm good, thanks.
That's okay, yep. Items 3 and 4 are related to item 5.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else have any comments, additions to the agenda? If not, then can I have a motion to approve the amended agenda? Moved, seconded, all in favor? Great, thank you very much. Just before we go into our delegations, can I have a motion to receive all reports, communications, and minutes, including late item Annex P? Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you very much. We move into item number 2, Angela Boss, Regional Agrologist. You're up. I understand you're going to be screen sharing with us.
Yes, thank you. Good morning to the chair and members of the Planning Development Committee. The Ministry of Agriculture is glad to be joining you today to present the results of the agricultural land use inventory for the Sunshine Coast Regional District and the accompanying agricultural water demand model. By way of introduction, my name is Angela Boss. I'm the regional agrologist with the Ministry of Agriculture responsible for the Sunshine Coast Regional District, as well as Cafet, Squamish-Lillooet Regional District, and parts of Metro Van. We have 2 presentations for you this morning. The first is the agricultural land use inventory with Corrine Rossler, the ALUI team lead, who will present. And immediately following Corrine, Stephanie Tam, the water management engineer with the Ministry of Agriculture, will present the agriculture water demand water results. And then we're also happy to take any questions the committee may have. So over to you, Corrine, if you want to share your screen.
Actually, it's me first, Stephanie Tam here.
Oh, Stephanie, go ahead.
So, sorry about that. I will share screen. I'll try to see if I can do that here. It's my first time doing this, so. Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
I certainly can.
Perfect, thank you. So my name is Stephanie Tam, and I am the water management engineer with the Ministry of Agriculture in the Abbotsford office with Corrine and Angela. I've been in the ministry for 18 years now, and I look after pretty much the entire province in terms of water management. The Ministry of Agriculture developed the agriculture water demand model first for the Okanagan Valley in 2006. That's to help us understand the water needs for agriculture in adapting to the changing climates, as we all know. The model back then received the Premier's Award, recognizing the significant benefits that the model can offer to the agriculture sector. And since we developed it for the Okanagan back in 2006, since then we've expanded the model to over a couple dozens of regions in the province, including Sunshine Coast recently. And the regional staff have a copy of the report that I prepared for the model, and that talks about the details and the findings. But today, for the interest of time, I'm going to highlight only the key points here. So agriculture needs water to grow food, and we all need food to survive. And the intent of the water demand model is to reserve water for agriculture. And to determine how much water agriculture needs, the water demand model calculates the current water requirement for irrigation, livestock, frost protection, flood harvesting, all types of farm use based on the current land use that Corinne collects. Last year, her team did a survey for Sunshine Coast. And the model also estimates the future water demand based on climate change projection. Now, you may have heard about the revitalization of agricultural land reserve, and that's a key mandate of our Ministry of Agriculture. We need to protect farmland, obviously, but we also need to secure the water that go with the land in order to support food production. And this table that you see on the screen here comes out of a report done by a professional agrologist of our ministry back in 2005. BC, as you can see at the bottom here, is only about 50% self-reliance on food. And I think we can do better than that. And to become more self-reliant on food, we need additional land, we need additional water. Now, we have very good farmland in BC. We have 4.6 million hectares in the agricultural land reserve. But the challenge here is really about getting enough water to support farm use. There is water, but most of the water is in major rivers and streams far, far away from the farms. And now what we need to do here is to have the infrastructure in place to deliver that water to the farmland where it's needed. That's one challenge. The other challenge that farmers are facing is climate change. We have hotter summers, let snow pass, the snow melts earlier in the season, we have longer growing season. And all that means is that our crops and livestock need more water as we move further along into climate change. So those are the reasons why we want to develop the water demand model. And for it to calculate current and future water requirements for agriculture, we need to know the current crops and irrigation system used in each parcel. And therefore, we conduct the agricultural land use inventory, ALUI, and that will be something that my colleague Corinne Brosler will discuss in a few minutes. We also need soil type. We work with the Ministry of Environment to digitize all the soil texture layer across the province. And we also need climate data, historical from 1960 to 2010, and also future projection up to year 2100. All these data, we put it into a series of algorithms to calculate the water that's needed for each parcel. Now, because of the level of details that we put into the model, it is able to calculate the water demand on a property by property basis. As you can see in the previous slide, it's by property. And then we can sum them all up, and we can have the model tell us the demand by crop type, irrigation system type, local government, or for the entire region, however summarization that you would like to see. And here I would like to point out a really key item here is that there is some sensitivity on the data. Water demand data that's calculated by the model is being treated very differently from the data that's coming out of the land use inventory that Corinne collects through survey. And I'll leave it up to Corinne to explain the land use data in her presentation. But for me, for the water demand data, only the summarized results that you see in the report will be published. We never give out the parcel level water demand data to anyone, not even other provincial governments or municipalities. And the reason of that is the parcel level water demand data could get into some compliance and enforcement issues, which is not the mandate of the Ministry of Agriculture. What we do support is regional water planning purposes, that sort of thing, that would use water demand data to carry on with the planning process. And those summarized data is what you need to plan those strategies. And those are the summarized data that is already included in the report. Now, for the Sunshine Coast, I have some key water demand results here on the table. That's based on the land use survey completed last year. The model has historical climate data from 1960 to 2010, but here we use year 2003 because it was the driest year in history. And therefore, the model is able to calculate the water demand in the worst case scenario. Now, for the climate change projection up to year 2100, we figure out from the climate change model that year 2053 would be the hottest and driest year going into the future. And now this forage, vegetables, fruit, apples, and other crops, those are the crop type that are being collected or have been collected through the survey. That's the current cropping in Sunshine Coast. And if we assume that the same cropping will remain the same, the same cropping will happen in the future, because of climate change, we're going to need, on average, about 67% more water in the future. Now, what if on top of climate change, we have additional farmland that we need more water? So you see, sorry, this is a little bit small probably on your computer screen here, but the blue areas here scattered a little bit on the south side of the regional district. Those are the areas, that farmlands that are currently irrigated. And the red areas are the potential farmland that are not being irrigated at this point, but if they all do, we will need way more water than we currently have access to. Not sure how we can get those water when that happens. But this is where you're able to use the water demand data to develop an agricultural area plan, food and water strategy, and then set some water policies to manage the water supply and demand for your region. Now, the model results are theoretical. It has a whole bunch of algorithms, take in the data that's coming in, and produce a theoretical value of how much water farms need. They are not the actual use by the farmers. So people question, well, how accurate is your model? Because it's only theoretical. Back then, when we developed it for the Okanagan in 2006, we've taken the meter data from three irrigation districts from 1990 to 2003. So Summerland, Black Mountain, and Southeast Kelowna. The meter data are the actual use, and we compare with the theoretical results from the model. They are very close, as you can see from the graphs. Now I'm just going into the last slide here. So now, aside from using the water demand data for developing a cultural area plan, land use, or food strategy, it has also been used in other regions for developing a water sustainability plan. And that's a plan that the Water Sustainability Act supports. Some local government receive funding from Investment Agriculture Foundation to do some initial work towards a water sustainability plan that looks at all water users in all the sectors in the community: agriculture, residential, school field, golf courses, fisheries, really all the water users who share the same water source within the community are included in that planning process. And not sure if your group has heard about this, but I can definitely send you more information about that funding program that you may be interested in after this meeting. And that's kind of what I have to say for today for the water demand model. And I'm not sure if there's time for questions before we go to Corinne, or maybe we can go to Corinne first and have everybody understanding the agricultural land use inventory and the water demand model and have those questions answered at the end. I'll leave that up to you guys.
The other members also have presentations for us?
Yes, we have one more.
Okay, so are there any questions on this one real quick while we've got it up from directors before we move on to the next one? No? Oh, Director McMahon?
Yeah, I was just wondering, when calculating future irrigated areas, was that just ALR lands that are not currently irrigated?
Well, it's actually, we're looking at the soil classification. Is it suitable for farming? It's not just agricultural land. Sorry, it's not just agricultural land reserve.
Okay. Actually, I had a quick question. If you can go back to slide 7 for a sec.
Sure. There.
So this chart shows the increase in water that would be required for irrigation of just the listed amount of area, right? Like the 15.5 hectares of forage. It's going to require a 75% increase in water over what they used or used in 2003.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That will be the worst case scenario. Just want to be cautious of that because we're looking at the worst case scenario in history, 2003, and also the worst case scenario into the future. So it could go anywhere between 0 to 75%.
Okay.
Also depending, in this scenario, we are expecting people to be more efficient down the road because of climate change or other reasons, allocation issues perhaps. And people could grow different types of crops. People could use different types of irrigation system. All that comes into play, and the model would be able to adjust, make those adjustments to give you the more detailed results based on what you're picking, what you're predicting, what the future will look like.
Okay, thank you. Director Seegers.
Thank you. So I'm just looking for some clarity on this. So when you were looking at these crops, for example, were you looking at only ALR land, or were you looking at land that is farmed, whether or not it's in ALR? And then if that's the case, did you also include land that's in ALR that is not being farmed?
That's correct. We're looking at land, well, actually not this one. When you're saying not being farmed, that is not captured in the agricultural land use survey. So we're looking at active farming with or without irrigation.
Right. So totally separate from what is actually designated as ALR.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Because there could be dryland farming too. Probably not in your region, but in the Peace and others, there are a lot of dryland farming. So we do capture those as farmed, but not irrigated.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up, so I think we're okay to continue.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll let Corinne take over the screen.
Yep, so you can stop sharing your screen, Stephanie, and we'll Corinne can share her screen.
Okay, not sure how I stop sharing. Let me just check.
Hi, Steph. Yeah, I can't share until you stop.
Okay, you know what? I can't.
If you click the
top, Stephanie, at the very top, you need to put your mouse to the top. Then there's green bar.
under
Yeah. You know what? I'm just gonna close the whole thing and I'll rejoin. That will be easiest.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh. Okay, can someone tell me what they're seeing?
We've got your screen. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Corinne Rosler, I'm the Agricultural Land Use Inventory Lead So we did an agricultural land use inventory in the Sunshine Coast in 2019. And I'm just going to run through a little bit about agricultural land use inventories. So we inventory land use, land cover, agricultural activities, crop production practices, irrigation systems on parcels in the agricultural land reserve, and we try to find farming outside the agricultural land reserve as well. So we look at every single parcel that's in the agricultural land reserve. And the data is, it can be used to describe how the agricultural land reserve is being utilized, which is very, very valuable information for policy and planning. It provides a baseline from which to measure performance of policies and plans. And as Stephanie mentions, it drives the agricultural water demand model. So this project had many partners. It was the Sunshine Coast Infrastructure Services Committee that provided, I think it was $5,000 to help us get off the ground. Gibson's and Seashell provided data, and the Canadian Agriculture Partnership, BC government, and the Partnership for Water Sustainability covered the rest. I believe the cost of the project was about $20,000 in total. So agriculture land use inventory, we start in the office. We use GIS, geographic information systems, and orthophotography, and we separate the land cover components on the agriculture land use inventory, or any parcel we find that has farming. And then we actually classify that land cover, and what you're seeing on the screen is our coding system for crops, natural areas, houses, managed vegetation, etc. Then we follow it up with a windshield survey. We drive around and look at properties from the road where we can't tell what's happening on the property from the ortho imagery. We don't use maps anymore. We mostly use iPads and things like that, but I just always forget to take a new picture when I'm out in the field. So the resulting data is a map. Crops, irrigation, livestock, ag practices, all in a mapping environment. And we can use that data to figure out percentages of the agricultural land reserve, what is being used, what is potential for farming. And that potential for farming is what is being considered in the agriculture water demand model. So to share results, we have the GIS data. We also put together web applications. This is the one we put together for Sunshine Coast. And we'll also put together what we call an ag in brief, just a short document of key messages and stats. And this is a screenshot of the Sunshine Coast web application. I think Sunshine Coast staff has been given a demonstration of this, and they have the link and the password if anyone is interested in playing with this application. So just quickly to run through some of the results. We looked at, well, the agricultural land reserve is just under 4,000 hectares in the Sunshine Coast. But about 31% is Crown and 2% is in First Nations. So parcels is only about 55, 65, 67% is in parcels. And so that's what we focused on, is that 67%, which is 2,665 hectares. And that agricultural land reserve land is distributed across most of the jurisdictions, I think all of the jurisdictions in the Sunshine Coast. Most of it is privately held. Seashell has the most, with electoral area F close behind. So when we look at the privately owned agricultural land, there's 580 privately owned parcels in the agricultural land reserve. 8% are farmed. That's by land cover, it's 8%, 166 hectares, and also 8% by parcel count, 47 parcels. And And the bigger story here is what is available for farming. So full 70% by land cover is still available for farming. It's not being used. It doesn't have a house on it. It doesn't have a building on it. It doesn't have a golf course on it. And that's quite a significant amount of agricultural land reserve that has potential for farming. When we look at the 580 parcels using parcel size, we see that most of the farming, the percentage of farming increases as the parcel size increases. There's not a lot of farming in Sunshine Coast, but this bell curve that we see, or this sloped curve that we see, is really, really typical across all jurisdictions in the province. Small parcels are less likely to be farmed. And we see that there's only 2 of the 120 less than 1 hectare parcels in the agricultural land reserve that are actually farmed in the Sunshine Coast. And I wanted to show this one to show you where the potential for farming parcels are. There's 495 of them, and they are distributed across parcel sizes with the concentration in between 1 to 2 hectares and 2 to 4 hectares in size. Those are really nice parcel sizes for new entrants, for new farmers. And I'm glad I put this slide in. We found 35 parcels that were farmed outside the agricultural land reserve. The ones outside are in the lighter green, and they're also in mostly smaller parcels, and there's a lot of less than 1 hectare, not a lot, 8 less than 1 hectare parcels outside the agricultural land reserve that are farmed. How am I for time? Okay, so cropped area. This is not irrigated area, this is cropped area, and where it is across the jurisdictions. Pasture is the #1 crop, followed by forage, followed by vegetables, and then tree fruits. And Seashell has the most cropping, almost 70 hectares, but I believe that's still only 11% of the agricultural land reserve land in Seashell that's actually cropped. And livestock, we found 215 parcels with livestock. 91 parcels are outside of the agricultural land reserve. And not all 91 parcels are considered farmed. If they have a very small amount of livestock and they're not utilizing much of the parcel, it doesn't actually qualify as a farm. It just qualifies as hobby livestock. Electoral Area D has the most parcels with livestock. And we found 33 parcels with what we call agricultural value added. This is where there's direct sales, processing, or some sort of agri-tourism operation. And I just put a list of the names that we came up with. Not all 33 parcels are represented on this slide, but there seemed to be quite a robust value-added community in the Sunshine Coast. And so just in conclusion, small amount of the land is farmed, 8%. 29% of cropping occurs outside of the agricultural land reserve. 85% of privately owned ALR parcels are considered to have potential for farming over a variety of lot sizes. And I just want to mention that water or land clearing has not been considered when evaluating potential. So I don't know if there's a water source, and I'm not evaluating the cost to clear land. So, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Directors, do you have any questions on this section? The data in there is absolutely fascinating. I think it's neat to see what's currently in use, what's not in use, and how it's in use. So thank you for that. Director Seegers.
Thank you. I was really impressed with the 2 slides, the one that said cropped area and then the following one. In the cropped area, you talked about, yep, right there. You say 70% is what you said of the 70% of the ALR is available for farming. when you do that, do you also look at the quality of that land? Because I know that the ratings of some of the land that is designated as ALR here on the Sunshine Coast, you couldn't grow anything on it. And I know some of the properties where, you know, there are substantial sizes, they've done extensive testing, you know, evaluating and whatever to determine what could be grown on there, and it doesn't work. Yeah, it'd be this one here. So the 70%, right? Available and potential for farming of ALR, because they're not being used right now. But I know that some of them aren't suitable. And then the other piece that ties in with that is when we're looking at, like, one of the assumptions behind all of your data here is that we're going to do land-based agriculture. So it's not things like innovative agricultural practices. How do you bring that in as well? So that's one question. Sorry, long rambling.
Yeah, thank you.
Long day yesterday.
I'll try to answer the first question. So when we're in the agricultural land use inventory, when we're evaluating availability and potential, yeah, we aren't digging soil pits. It's very true that we're using the information that we have. And it is a bit of an assumption that if it's in the agricultural land reserve, it has a certain minimum capability for agriculture. But the other thing I would mention, and we do try to literally digitize out things that are apparently not available for agriculture, such as steeper ravines or slopes or rocky outcrops that you can actually see in the imagery. And that would be what we've separated out with limited potential for farming. And then the unavailable for farming as well. So we do have 22% of the agricultural land reserve that we've neglected to add as potential. But I would mention too that available and potential for farming is not always soil-based. So there is the possibility to put in greenhouses and other non-soil-based types of agriculture. And so we don't want to say that that land has no potential. It may not have great soil potential, but it has farming potential, barns, crop barns, poultry barns, things like that. And for the other question, I'll ask Angela to answer that one if she could.
Can you repeat that second question for me?
Good question. I have no idea.
It was related to innovation and how.
Yes, totally right.
Yeah, and how you know, the ALUI might relate or might consider innovations in agriculture. And I'm really looking at the land, and I'm looking at potential, but when it comes to what actually occurs on the land, I step back, and Angela would be the one that was sort of identifying the particular operations that might be appropriate for the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, and where that comes into play is ALR land. You can only have certain coverage for, for agriculture. But if the land itself, I mean, in one case particular that I'm aware of, it's a 60-acre parcel, and unless they did massive, rehabilitation of the property, you couldn't grow anything there. Now, it could be used for greenhouses, could be used for other kinds of things like that. But then there's a limitation on lot coverage or site coverage, which comes into play too. So I think there's more work that needs to be done behind the scenes here for us to be able to take all of this information and say that, it would be available for crops, because if we're going to have to remediate the soil, it's going to require a lot more water up until the time when it actually can grow something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate Corinne's point that the parcels that have been identified as available for farming, that notion of being available covers sort of the broad spectrum of permitted uses on the agriculture land reserve, and that is includes but is not exclusive of soil-bound agriculture. So that could be various kinds of livestock or or greenhouses or innovative of agricultural technologies that don't necessarily require like a complete renovation of the land itself or the, and it can include intensive agriculture where you're not using the entire parcel of land in order to have a very productive and viable agriculture business. So certainly, what you can do with the land will vary depending on your business model. I think for me, the critical piece is that there is a tremendous amount of available land on the Sunshine Coast, even if half of that was put into production. What that would look like would be quite interesting in terms of an ag plan, and that's where I think other districts then take this information from a land use inventory and then feed that into a planning process with the community to look at what an agriculture area plan might look like that fits not only the ecology and the agricultural systems at play, but also the community values around their food system.
Thank you.
Director Hilts.
Thanks. Yeah, it's nice to see all the information in kind of one place. And so the public access to this information is the first question that I have about when that will become. The second question goes to the definition of what farming is and where that boundary between farming and hobby farming lies, and is that how firm is that line?
You kind of broke up a bit there, but I think your question was about, and I'm just scrolling through. So the GIS data will be shared with the regional district, the full data set. And this web application is under development now. It's currently behind a password. And we are working with our security officer, the Ministry of Agriculture security officer, to get permission to release this data publicly. But we don't have permission yet, so it still is sitting behind a password. But that is the hope, is that we can release this publicly, and the web application itself as well as the data. And regarding the definition of farming, so when we look at land cover, this picture here is land cover, and you can see the patterns on the landscape. That one's quite easy. If it's cropped, if it's in a barn, if it's some sort of farmyard, then it's actively farmed. And on a parcel level, though, we look at thresholds. So if 50% or more of the parcel is used in an for agriculture, then we consider it farmed. And then the percentages change depending on the activity. So coverage goes down if you have livestock, like crop coverage threshold would go down if the livestock numbers go up, and it's sort of like a rolling threshold that's it's a SQL query in a database that's about 25 lines long. But it is not calculated in the field by the agrologist. It is calculated in a database. So once the Sunshine Coast gets the data, you can change your definition of farming to suit your needs and calculate what you think you want to categorize as farmed versus what the Ministry of Agriculture is defining as farmed. Because yes, you're right. I mean, it's just a threshold that we apply to a parcel, and then we say it's farmed or it's not farmed.
Okay, so there is some room for local governments to have some flexibility there on what they will define as farmed.
Oh, of course. Yes, of course. Because it's applied in a database. It's not actually it's not determined at field survey time.
And if I may follow up?
Go ahead.
In terms of that threshold, that 50%, and the Sunshine Coast is a bit unique in that most parcels are small. It's highly variable soil conditions, and a lot of the agricultural analysis in BC is for larger parcels. So is there anything that separates out the Sunshine Coast in terms of that threshold and the particular issues of the Sunshine Coast in this analysis?
So when I calculated the farming definition for the Sunshine Coast, I used the same algorithm that I used for Powell River, for instance, and I would have used for the Comox Valley. So no, I didn't customize it considering your particular conditions. But we would be happy to do that if there was somebody, you know, Angela and I could reach out and try to figure out if there was some sort of way we could fine tune the farming definition if it would be useful for one of your projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have another follow-up, Director Hilts? No. Okay. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. By the way, I'd very much like a copy of this presentation when we're done. Is having some horses on your property considered to be farming? And did you consider estate housing? Because frankly, once somebody's taken a parcel of ALR and built a mansion on it, it's never going to be farmed because of the property values.
Yes, and I only had 10 minutes, so I didn't include a slide on residential uses in the agricultural land reserve, but the data does include those measures. As you noticed, we digitize out the residence, the home plate. So if there's an estate home that occupies most of the parcel, it will be considered unavailable for farming. But if there is an estate home on the parcel and there is sufficient land available for farming, then it would be considered available for farming in the current definition. And we, in the Lower Mainland, we see a lot of estate homes that are farms. And I know I hear what you're saying is that the productivity of the land or the motivations of the landowners may be a little different, but it's very hard to predict the motivations of landowners. And so what we look at is there enough land there to crop? Could you put a horse or a couple cows on that property? And if the answer is yes, then we consider that property available for farming.
Thank you. Director McMahon, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I did. What are our next steps for drilling down into this data to get, you know, more specific information about our area?
Well, that's a good question. I need direction. So I'll let Angela answer that one as well if she has any ideas.
Well, I think one of the first steps is the information in terms of accessing the GIS. The web app is available through the regional district. So I would suggest one way is to start playing with that information in the web app. And if you would like a customized tutorial on how to use that, I'm happy to set up a separate Zoom meeting with yourself or with other staff to work through that app. You can sort the data in that app based on electoral area or region within the regional district. So you can just get data specific to what you're looking at, whether that's the district of Seashelt or Gibsons or one of the electoral areas. So that's certainly one step, and it will generate these kinds of graphs that you see on the screen right now, and that can all be filtered down to a particular area. So we can certainly do a demonstration of that for you if that would be helpful in working through some of these pieces. The information, as you can see across the top, you can filter data a bit by land use, crops, livestock, land cover, the value additions. There's a lot of potential with this information. So happy to do that with you, and then happy to continue to work with this committee and the regional district in terms of brainstorming what your next steps could be with this information in terms of from a planning perspective. And we can also pull in our land use planners if that's helpful.
I think the Agricultural Advisory Committee would have a lot of valuable input into this, so that'll be great to connect it with them. Director McMahon, did you have another follow-up? Your hand is still up.
Oh, just to say thank you very much. This is great information. This will really help us take a better look at our agricultural policy.
For sure. Director Ties?
Hi there. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple questions. One is I see a lot of complexity considering that we're short on water already, and adding more water, we're quickly realizing the cost of it, and what the return on investment would be of increasing our agricultural yield here on the coast compared to adding more water infrastructure, which isn't very easy apparently. So I'm just wondering as to whether there's any kind of modeling that you guys are doing in regards to that. And I guess that would need communication with infrastructure services. My second question is marijuana production. $250 million a year on the coast apparently, and it's probably not reflected anywhere in here. So I'm just wondering if there's any way that you guys are going to attempt to capture any of that. Thanks.
Stephanie, do you want to take the question about water, and maybe you could mention some of the water calculators that are available?
Yeah, so cannabis has been illegalized, but we do not have that as a cropping category as yet because of the algorithm that needs to go in, how much water is going to use, if it is in a greenhouse, if it is open. We do not have those data nailed down yet to calculate the water demand. And that's why we are still reluctant of adding that as a cropping category, let alone all these other political side of things about the cannabis. Now, about water infrastructure modeling using water demand data, we have a lot of staff in Ministry of Forest that looks after the authorization piece. They have use some of the water demand data summarized level to look at some of those pieces. And for your regional district or regional district level, this is where you would go to develop a watershed plan. And that's something that Investment in Agriculture would fund. And that process takes you into getting into the very details of the hydrological modeling. Water comes in, water goes out, what's the balance, and what is the need really? And to build off on those detailed data, that will give you some idea of what kind of infrastructure needs you would have. And on top of that, of course, is the regulatory piece that you need to go past, DFO, Ministry of Forest, and get the licensing and all that stuff, right? So, yeah, so I would say is the Investment in Agriculture Foundation. They have a funding program that will support the modeling, and that will get you down the path of water infrastructure. And if you want to have more information about that funding program, I can definitely send it to Angela, and Angela can share it with the group.
I'd also just recommend the looking at the BC Agriculture Water Calculator. So this is a tool that has been developed by the Partnership for Water Sustainability. That you can put in various your area on the map and put in various bits of information about the soil, the crop, the irrigation parameters, the type of irrigation you're looking at, and really play with looking at what the irrigation water demand would be under various conditions and with different scenarios. And that can help with individual parcels and planning, but also from a broader view of what agriculture water demand could look like in an area, given the water. So I'm happy to send that, the link to that water calculator along as well. It's quite a useful tool. We shared it with the Farmers Institute when we were on the Sunshine Coast in the winter.
All right, thank you very much. Director Seegers.
Thank you. Director McMahon asked a question about horses, and I don't think we addressed that. One of your slides actually showed, equine use of farmland. Because I know one of the things that we've been looking at is how do we actually have sustainable meat production, right? Whatever form that takes on the Sunshine Coast. But most of the land that's used for animals is used for horses, I believe. I think that's what your slide showed.
Corinne, do you have the definition of how many horses is considered a farm?
It depends on the size of the property, and it depends on how much is in pasture of the size of the property. So let me see if I can find the slide.
Yeah, there's another slide where you showed right there, that one, the one with that livestock. There you go.
Yeah. So we have a count of equines. I think there was about 550 that we actually counted, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we consider a horse farm a farm. So if it meets the definition for farming, like I was mentioning, if it met that definition, then it was reported as farmed in the application and in the presentation.
Okay.
And I guess the premise is that you could take a horse away and put a cow, and so all of a sudden you have an actual food production farm rather than and many horses end up in the food chain, I think, is another thing I've been told.
Corinne, the assessment, this information does not pull in from BC assessment, is that correct?
No. So this is why we're working towards publishing this data. This is the data that we're presenting is all observable. So we capture what we see, and so horses are very difficult. We can't confirm there's a horse using BC assessment because they're not eligible for farm class under BC assessment, where a different kind of livestock production may be eligible for farm class. If that is that kind of your question?
Yeah, that you're using two different sets of definition for this. So the ALUI has its own definition of farm versus what like a tax farm assessment would be.
Oh, yes. This is our definition of farmed is all based on how the parcel is being used in terms of land cover and the extent of livestock that we have observed on the parcel. Mm-hmm. So we have no idea how much money a parcel is making, and that is not a consideration in our farm definition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then just a point to us, I guess, as a board, to the board members. So one of the things that we've seen in the last while is farms that are serious about, irrigation, etc., are actually looking at finding their own water sources. So they're actually bringing wells on board so that they can water outside of the regional district supply. So when we go forward and look at how much water we're looking to provide for agricultural purposes, it would be, we'd have to look at what is our policy going to be around that, and how are we going to support that so that potentially it wouldn't be us providing it, potable water to them, but that they have water sources. So just policy kind of stuff. Thanks. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it makes for an interesting discussion, doesn't it, on where we want to supply water and where we want to encourage a farm to find its own water and reduce its reliance on our infrastructure. Okay, no more questions?
Sorry, it's Corinne again. I want to mention one other thing. This is a snapshot in time. So this data represents the state of affairs in 2019, and we'll work to improve that snapshot if we can. If we've made some mistakes, we'll work, and there'll be a little bit of editing as the web application is used by more people and we get feedback on individual properties, for instance. But we won't come back in and update the data for 2020 or 2021. The The hope is that we would come back to Sunshine Coast in 5 years, update the inventory, and then we can see what's changed. If there's a change in farming trends, if farming is increasing in the Sunshine Coast or decreasing.
I guess actually that brings a question to mind for me. When you're using imagery to do all this off of, are you using the SCRD imagery, which I believe is updated every 4 years, or are you using imagery from somewhere else?
I believe in this case it was SCRD imagery. Yeah, the imagery is key to a good inventory. So yeah, if we may end up, if we come back in 5 years and the imagery is already 1 year old, then that would be something we'd have to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for your time. We'll leave you to the rest of your meeting.
All right. Moving on to item 3, I understand staff would like to perhaps give us an update before we go into delegations here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the first report on the agenda, and the one for which the following 2 delegations are in attendance, relates to a development variance permit application. And this application and the steps leading up to it have been a challenging file for reasons that are evident in the staff report. And some of these reasons are that it's always more complex to process an application when a variance is required mid-project. In cases like this, there's a lack of capture of information, pre-condition information. And this is an added challenge for non-conforming projects where we're talking about the physical envelope of the building. The variance also deals with a lake, which has a natural boundary, and lakes change through natural processes or through human intervention. And as well, there have been running changes to the project with geotechnical advice entering the picture during the project. This property involves a covenant, a historic covenant, and as well, there's the application of the Provincial Riparian Areas Regulation. And all of these have to be considered as well, along with the soft impacts that come from a variance relating to things like views, privacy, and noise. And staff always seek to objectively analyze applications, and this analysis is put under pressure when construction has occurred intentionally or otherwise, contrary to permits. Making a professional recommendation of support to authorize, after the fact, unauthorized construction requires that there not be a detrimental impact to the environment, the community, or to adjacent property owners. And on this file, since the drafting of the report, and this is the update to the committee, staff can advise that work has continued in spite of a stop work order to at least as recently as May 11th, as observed by me, by the Manager of Planning and Development, and by the CAO. This includes work to the building and unauthorized work in the riparian area, and bylaw enforcement has attended. Secondly, staff have received information through dialogue with neighboring property owners relating to the impact of the variance if granted, and are aware of the neighbors' opposition to the variance. And as noted, one of the neighboring property owners is a delegation today. And further, that neighboring property owners have indicated that they have information to provide to the process, and that some of this information relates to siting. And as noted in the staff report, we've done our best to identify the location of the house on the basis of several survey certificates and based on the information available. Siting and being clear about the siting is critical to determining the variance that is required. And so for these reasons, staff recommend that the matter be deferred in order to provide more time for analysis. And we acknowledge that the analysis to date has taken some time and that deferral will require more time. But note, firstly, that work apparently continues on the property. And secondly, that the applicant's builder's error is the root of the need for a variance. Staff are committed to serving the community with consistent, responsive professional planning services, and a deferral would support this commitment. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hall. If we, process-wise, because we do have these two delegations here in front of us today, if we allow them to proceed and then end up deferring this, when the application comes back, they will not be allowed to present again. Is that correct?
Chair Toth, it's Dean here. So if they are to give a presentation now as delegations, either party, if the item is deferred and we reappear, they would not be able to present on the same topic. They would be able to present on new information, not the topic matter of subject matter of the presentation they give today, should they give one today. But they would have the option to present at an upcoming meeting, just not on the same subject matter.
Okay. Then in that case, I suppose it's up to our delegations whether they still would like to present today or whether they would like to wait. The challenge, of course, for them is that you don't know if we're going to defer this or not. So, Lorna, you're actually up next. Would you like to speak today?
I have a question because it's a difficult thing to make a decision on if we don't know if you're going to defer or not. And because if you are going to defer, then we would not present because we want to present our entire package as a whole. If you're not going to defer, then we would want to present.
I suppose that's a more clarification for Dean, because if we bring item 5 forward now, can we go back to the delegations if we choose to? Well, okay. So Lorna, you would prefer to present only if the item is being considered today?
I think that the only way that it can be done so that the committee understands the entire scope of this problem, which has been going on. I've started this project in 2015. I think the only way that it's fair for the entire committee and for myself and Mr. Adelbaum is if you're going to defer looking at this application, then I think that it would be very hard to deconstruct the presentation as to what is new and old information. Because I received an email at 4 o'clock yesterday advising me that they had new information, even though we have had 2 weeks since the APC meeting to provide the committee and the SCRD with our information for this presentation. So I think that it's better for all, not just myself, but if you're going to defer it, that we just wait and we wait until you actually view this application, than to try and present material and then have to figure out what we presented this time versus what we're going to present next time. Because I actually have not seen the new information. It was a last minute 4 o'clock email that I got yesterday. And there also seems to be some confusion because I think people thought I withdrew my application, which I absolutely have not.
Okay. Mr. Adelbaum. Oh, sorry. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Just if it's helpful procedurally, I believe that the committee can amend the order of the agenda to consider a report and then go back to the delegations portion of the agenda should they wish.
Okay. Mr. Adelbaum, do you feel similarly? Would you prefer to wait if we defer this?
First of all, I want to thank the chair, the committee, and staff for taking time to consider this very complex matter, and also to appreciate that as things unfold, it becomes more complex. I have certainly no problem. I just want it to be fair, and I'm happy to defer presenting today, and then allow time for the proper data to be realized by everyone, and then hopefully we can work together to develop a solution that's going to minimize the impact for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that if we choose to defer item number 5, then it looks like both parties will be willing to come back at another day. If we don't defer, then I think we can go back to 3 and 4 and get the presentations underway. So I think we should probably move to number 5.
Sounds.
And
Director Seegers. Oh, Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, just from a process question, I just verified with the corporate officer that Ian's correct. The order can be shifted and the matter can be considered as to whether or not you would like to defer. And if it's decided that there's a deferral, there may be no need for presentations. And if the committee would like to consider the matter, then you could have the presentations out.
Okay, Director Seegers.
Sorry, wrong mouse. I guess I won't be voting on this. I'm not part of the group that will be voting on this. But one of the issues that I find concerning about this whole thing is that a stop work order has been put in place and construction is continuing. And according to Mr. Hall, it is still continuing, even though we know that we haven't actually voted on this. So that I find concerning, because there's obviously, it appears to be there's no willingness to look at what the board's going to do, because if construction is continuing, despite the fact that it doesn't have the variance in place, is there any recognition of the authority that the regional district has? It's a concern.
Okay. Director Pratt.
I was going to raise the same concern raised by Director Seegers. I am deeply concerned that we have a stop work order in place and work is continuing, and that's really I'm just wondering what kind of level of insurance, if we're going to defer this, that and not make a decision today, or that the work will work continue, even though this has already been an issue.
I don't know if Mr. Hall would like to speak to that, or should we perhaps move into the report? Okay, so we're going to go into the report. Staff can speak to that, and then we can make a decision on whether we're going to defer or not, and then we'll move from there. Okay. So item number 5, Annex B, Development Variance Permit, DVP 00054.
Process question. I'd like to make a motion that we amend the agenda and move item 5 up.
Okay, seconded. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Staff?
Well, thank you, Chair. Staff don't have much to add from the comments made a moment ago. We're committed to treating this file as a priority and seeking a way forward here, and the committee can expect to see it on an agenda soon. Thank you.
Okay, hang on a second. I lost my participant list here. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I was question for staff. What are our tools to enforce a stop work order?
Thank you for the question. There's the ability to issue tickets for failing to obey a stop work order. And multiple tickets can be issued if work continues. And the tool beyond that is a civil injunction. And as well, if there are contraventions of provincial regulations that relate to work being done, then the province is typically notified. Thank you.
All right, Director Hilts.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify the language of defer versus postpone and refer to staff, I'm listening to the corporate officer, and my idea that we're actually asking to refer this report back to staff and to postpone it to a future meeting rather than to defer. Just a point of clarification.
Totally broke up there, but I think what you were asking was whether we really do want to defer it, which will bring back the same report, or whether we want to refer this back to staff, which will allow for something different to come. Given that we don't have the corporate officer here, does CAO McKinley want to channel his inner Sherry?
I'll try my best. This would have been one where my inner Sherry would have been better if it was my actual Sherry. However, I think in this particular case, and Ian, you can maybe correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I don't know that it's going to functionally make much of a difference which of the two words we use. The principle, I guess, is we're either prepared to make a decision on it today, or we would like to delay that decision to allow for further analysis from staff. So it can be referred back to staff to be presented at a future report, or it can be deferred. I think either is okay.
All right, thank you very much. Director Lee.
Yes, I would just like to confirm with staff that this is actually not about a failure to stop work, even though that's kind of a bad thing. But it's actually new information that's about contravention of a provincial regulation, which needs to be investigated, and also a potential for new information on the building itself that needs to be clarified as to whether the original assessment was right or not. Am I correct on that?
Thank you for the question, Director. The piece that staff want to do more work on is relating to the siting of the building, and that informs the variance that would be required in order to authorize the building, and as well, staff are aware that neighboring property owners would like to provide information into the process, and one of those neighboring property owners was prepared to present as a delegation today, but that would also be new information that would come in through next steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Right. Two things. First, if we defer, presumably this will come around next month to the next planning committee meeting. Like, how long are we deferring for? Secondly, I'm fine with deferring if the work actually stops, but if the work doesn't stop, then I'm struggling to see the point.
On the first question, Chair, from the Director, staff are committed to treating this as a priority and working as quickly as possible. I hesitate to specify a particular agenda, but the time frame that the Director describes is certainly a target. Thank you.
Director McMahon, did you have a follow-up? Or okay, Director Ties.
Thank you. Yeah, I do feel like the ignoring of stop work orders is something that's deeply concerning to me. I think it's not helpful for our staff, both in the planning department as well as for the building inspectors and the bylaw officers, that their authority is somewhat undermined. I share those concerns. but I also want to respect staff's request for a fair and objective summary. So I'm willing to move the deferral at this point. But I see that Director Pratt has some questions as well.
Director Pratt.
Thank you. I was going to make a motion to refer Annex B back to staff to bring forward at a future committee meeting. And I think that will take care of our corporate officer. And I just double checked my Robert's Rules for Dummies, and I think a referral is better than a deferral.
Okay, so you're moving that?
Yes, thank you.
Voting on this is rural directors only. Somebody to second that? Seconded. Any other questions, comments? No? All those in favor? Thank you. Director Hilts, I did not see your hand go up. Are you opposed, or was that just lag?
Got lag, and yes, I'm voting in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you. That passes. So that will come forward or come back to us at a future meeting. Director Seegers.
Thank you. I guess to staff then, what will the enforcement be on the stop work order at this point? Do we ticket daily if they don't stop? Is there an escalation inside of that? What does that actually look like?
Thank you for the question. Staff are cautious about describing bylaw enforcement matters, but will say that bylaw enforcement has attended, and generalizing the issuance of tickets as frequently as daily is permitted. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. That is that for items 3, 4, and 5 for the time being. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation, the photographs of the site taken on, I believe it was December 2nd, there's 2 workers working well above 10 feet above a hard surface, and there's absolutely no visible signs of fall restraint. So, you know, if there's enforcement activities going on with respect to the site, it might be good to include safety concerns.
I don't believe that work-safe regulations are purview of the SCRD, but thank you for the comment. We're going to take a 5-minute break, let everybody get up and stretch, and let our delegations leave us. Thank you for coming, and thank you for sitting through everything.
Chair, Lorna had her hand up.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you very much, Lorna.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to address that at the current moment, which I've notified the SCRD in writing, that we have a rock slide on our property, and it needs to be worked on. And so I have notified them. I notified them last week. I've also now sent an email to both Ian Hall and to the other director about this fact. And so it's one of those scenarios where if something happens, for example, last week we had a broken water main, I'm not really sure how to rectify the problem without working on the site to correct it. So I want the committee to know that at this particular moment, last week we had a water main break, which I notified the SCRD in writing. And this week we had a rock slide in a very sensitive area. And the Geotech engineer had notified the SCRD back in October. I presented it to Dave Patti that there needed to be some type of restraint, and that was denied. And so now we are dealing with that problem currently.
Okay, thank you. I assume staff will address those concerns offline. That's not necessary to deal with here. Let's take 5 minutes, or 5 or 6 minutes, somewhere around 10:55, 10:50, 6? You want 10 minutes, Director McMahon? Okay, we'll see everybody back here at 11 o'clock. Thank you. All right, we're back. Before we move on to our next item on our agenda, Director McMahon, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to make a motion to refer the previous agricultural item to the Agricultural Advisory Committee.
All right, Director Pratt seconding that. All those in favor? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Annex C, item number 6 on our agenda. Removal and reapplication of bylaw contravention notice, District Lot 696 Keats Island. Turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. So I have Manager of Planning and Development, Dave Patti, and our Acting Chief Building Official, Brian Kennett, here. And Dave, were you going to introduce this report, please?
My apologies, Brian. Ian, where are we in the order of which report is it that we're presenting at
Annex
the moment?
C.
I'm sorry.
Keats Island.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you, Chair. Brian Kennett will be introducing this report.
Okay, so apologies, Chair. I think staff got our wires crossed here a little bit.
Yeah.
The SCRD was contacted by Islands Trust about the need to remove a notice on title related to a building bylaw issue that applies to a very, very large parcel on Keats that's proposed for subdivision. And the committee might recall discussion of this subdivision because there's a park dedication that was the subject of an earlier staff report some time ago. And as work continues on the subdivision, there's a need to ensure that the notice on title remains associated with the actual object of the notice, which is just one small structure within that larger lot. And so this report recommends that the SCRD agree through the resolution that's in front of the committee today that we are supportive of placing an equivalent notice of title on the new piece of property following subdivision. And this requires that we also agree to remove the notice that's on the very, very large parcel. And so it's an administrative thing that based on direction from the board, staff would pursue in order to ensure that the regional district continues to be protected by having this notice on title in place. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Right. I don't see Area F with a hand raised at the moment, but I just wanted to say I understand that this particular subdivision of this particular area has been ongoing since the 1970s. So I'm delighted to see forward progress being made. Unless Area F cares, would like to move staff's recommendation, I'd be happy to do so.
Okay, moved. Area F, are you going to second it? All right, seconded. I just had one quick question for staff. On page 68, it mentions that once the subdivision is completed and the moratorium on new construction is lifted by Islands Trust, is there a timeline on that moratorium, or is somebody currently creating lots that won't be able to be built upon?
I think I can answer that question. It's more so the subdivision is to allow the existing structures to have legal lot lines. So not as much creating new property from new development, but bring the existing structures and properties into compliance with Islands Trust's land use regulations.
All right, thank you for that. Director Ties.
I think that just answered my question. I was wondering if there's going to be new construction happening where the water would all be coming from, but it sounds like there's already some structures there.
All right. Any other questions? No. Rural voting plus SIGD. who's not here with us today anyways. All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex D, item number 7 on the agenda, Westhouse Sound Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw and Zoning Amendment Bylaw, O'Toole. Staff?
Thank you, Chair. Yuli, did you want to introduce the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this application is seeking to take advantage of the property's location at the gateway to the Sunshine Coast with convenient connection to the public transit and amenities to create a development that blends in with the rural surroundings and minimize impacts on adjacent agricultural lands and provide affordable housing options for the owners of the land as well as the community. So the proposed cluster housing development can support the Westhouse Sound OCP's objective for promoting affordable housing opportunities in compatible areas. Staff recommend that the bylaws be presented to the board for first and second readings and public hearing be arranged. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Director Ties.
Thank you, staff, and I have to say that the applicants put in a very thorough and professional-looking application. My question is in what ways does the proposed zoning here differ from that used in the Roberts Creek co-housing? And I'm just wondering if we're reinventing the wheel here.
Thank you, Chair. So compared to the Roberts Creek co-housing, this project is very similar. In terms of layout, the type of uses, common area, spatial parameters, both are site-specific comprehensive development zones. The difference is just that this project is much smaller in size and the number of units. And in Roberts Creek, co-housing has about 31 units. This project has only about 10 units. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Director Hilts.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, staff, for the report. The information session hosted by the proponent back in March, I think, just before COVID got going. Outstanding attendance, packed Eric Cardinal Hall. I see a staff tallied up about 50 questions. Overall support so far. And for me, the kind of question comes down to, I'm reading this as the first attempt at the Westhouse Sound OCP to deal with the densification strategies. And so this area was not originally listed as a settlement cluster. And it's kind of how this area could develop. If you have this parcel, there's an adjoining parcel that might become a potential for the same type of development, and how the densification strategy plays into this development. And am I reading that right?
Thank you, Chair. So I can speak to that. So the OCP's densification strategy for Westhouse Sound to support affordable housing, particularly section 7.3 and 7.3.4, actually do not directly apply to the subject site because the site is not designated as residential in the OCP. But the designation for this site, rural residential, does have some attributes of both the rural and residential designations. So despite that these policies do not directly apply, the criteria of the policies to qualify a densification proposal have been adopted for this project. This includes providing water supply and sewage treatment, being within the regional solid waste collection and fire protection service area, and having convenient access to major roads and amenities and on major public transit routes, and the ability to manage stormwater, and a compatible design with the surrounding environment, and lastly, a direct contribution to affordable housing. So this development does not necessarily redefine this area as a new cluster settlement, because, for example, cluster housing, for example, a mobile home park already existed just across the road from the subject site. So with respect to the implication of this proposal on other rural residential area, actually there are only two such areas within the OCP. One is the area surrounding the subject site, and the other is the Grantham's Landing neighborhood. And both areas are adjacent to the existing residential destinations. So being in a transitional position, so these areas do have potential for higher density based on the merit of individual proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hilts, did you have a follow-up? Your hand is still up. Okay. Director McMahon.
Thanks. I like many things about this proposal. I think it's interesting. I think it's creative. And I think it's time to take it to a public hearing. My only quibble about the analysis of the site is that determining agricultural suitability just based on soil type is not perhaps a road we want to go down. It's very important to preserve what agricultural land we have. And so I just think that we should pay attention to how we make decisions around that. But otherwise, I think this is appropriate and it's time to move it forward.
Director McMahon,
does move staff's recommendations.
You're moving staff's recommendations. Okay, is there a seconder for those? Thank you, Director Hilts. Director Ties, you have your hand up.
I believe I have not chaired a public hearing, and I'm willing to chair this one if nobody else is chomping at the bit.
Thank you for that. Let me go find. I'm working off the order paper. My apologies. Okay, and alternate chair, Director Hilts. Okay, that is your area, of course. So, Director McMahon, did you have anything you wanted to say? No, you're okay. All right. So that last recommendation, further that Director Ties be delegated as the chair and Director Hilts be delegated as the alternate chair for the public hearing. Are there any questions? No. Rural areas only. All those in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex E. Sorry. Zoning Amendment Bylaw 7470 Red Roofs Road, consideration for first, second, and third, and adoption. Yuli, you're the author on this. I assume you're introducing it to us?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the proposed zoning amendment bylaw to allow an auxiliary dwelling on this property represents a minor amendment to the zoning bylaw number 310 to make the zoning for the subject site more consistent with the Half Moon Bay official community plan. So the proposal supports the creation of an affordable housing unit on the site. It is technically feasible in terms of providing on-site septic system. Staff recommend that the bylaws be presented to the board for first, second, and third reading and adoption conditional upon approval from the Ministry of Transportation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Director Pratt.
Thank you. I am happy to move staff's recommendations on this. We had a great conversation when it came to the APC, and my APC is certainly in favor of this, as I am as well. So I'm happy to move staff's recommendations.
All right, Director McMahon, I see you're seconding it. Are there any questions before we vote? Rural areas only. All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Annex F. Telecommunications Tower at Collie Point. Request for local government concurrence. Yuli, this is you again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the proposed telecommunication tower at Cowley Point will help to improve wireless communication and rural internet service to residents, marine traffic, and tourists along the Seashell Inlet. Improve communication capacity in this area is beneficial to the E911 service, search and rescue, and other emergency response organizations. So therefore, staff recommend the proposed facility that is appropriate for the location and consistent with SCRD policies, and recommend providing land use concurrence to the federal agency regarding this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I was very interested in this because I dug into the fine print. And on page 161, there was a question about the noise from the diesel generator. And I thought that was really interesting because we tend not to think about these things in remote areas, but if you're out there enjoying the wilderness, especially if you're anywhere near water, sounds like diesel generators can really carry. So I'm glad to see that there was some mitigation of the noise, and that they're going to be using solar panels as well on the tower so that they don't have to rely so much on the generator. That's great. I'm glad to see that people are paying attention to both noise and light pollution. So, you know, I'm happy again to move staff's recommendations on this.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Okay, thank you very much. I do see, Director Hilts, that you have your hand up. I just wanted to comment on the solar panels as well. I think that that's really innovative of them. I don't know that I've seen or heard of any other telecommunications towers yet that have solar panels on them. And yeah, anything we can do to reduce our reliance on diesel and fossil fuels is a great move in my mind. Director Hilts.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was particularly interested in the public information aspect of TELUS. And I did dig back to that SCRD 2003 procedure, and it says that a public information meeting is a requirement for these antennas. And seeing that you know, we're in a COVID period of time, we have a telecommunications leader, and did they choose not to do a public information meeting, or what? Because it's the first tower in Seashell Inlet. I don't see Salmon Inlet as being a site of coverage, and there's industrial activities up there. So I was just wondering if there was a thorough chance for the community to participate in this.
Yuli?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So, so TELUS has considered that because the location for the tower is in a remote area, and there are very few residential properties around. So then they decided not to hold a in-person public information meeting, and instead they use the newspaper advertising and mailing to surrounding property owners to gather input and provided a summary. So that's the reason a public meeting was not held. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Follow-up, Director Hilts?
Yeah, we're the follow-up. Sorry, I'm going to have to come back. Just I'll pass for a second.
Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just kind of what the consultation process is in general for these towers. and maybe if we could get a timeline of steps as to how it works, because I'm starting to get questions about the Roberts Creek one, and I don't know at what step in the process we are, and whether something like this is going to come to a future agenda, and if there is a public information meeting and a public hearing and people are asking questions. So I'm just wondering what the process is in general.
Julie?
Thank you for the question. So the process dealing with telecommunication towers is specified the federal government, and the decision will be finally rests within the federal jurisdiction. And the consultation process with the local government is a requirement of the federal protocols. The process usually goes like this. The applicant will notify the local government, and then they will conduct their own public consultation by sending out an information package to the surrounding area. And because SCRD also has its own protocol, it's somehow similar to that process. So on the SCRD side, we will refer the application to local area APC for consideration. And if a tower is within a more densely populated area, and normally a public information meeting will be held. And in case of the pandemic, so I think the meeting would likely to be a online format. And also the developer of the tower will have to respond to any comments and also provide a summary of the comments back to SCRD in order for staff to prepare a report and make a recommendation to the board. And there is no requirement for public hearing in this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did that cover you off, Director Ties? Okay. Director Hilts?
I think Director Lee might be in there before me.
Okay, Director Lee.
Yes, I wanted to comment on this because, in fact, the intent of this tower is to actually service the Dorston and the Egmont waterfront area, as well as provide service up the Narrows Inlet, which is a home of the First Nations. And it's been asked for by the community for years now. This is important to them, and it's also an important safety issue for the users of the Skookumchuck Park. There is no cell service there, and the alternative is small cell sites, which are not well received by the community, by the way. But a tower which is a sufficient distance away is a fairly universally accepted way of providing cell service. It's got the added benefit of providing cell service to the heavy marine traffic in and out of the Narrows as well. And so it's a very serious safety concern, and it is actually very welcome in the Egmont and Dorston communities. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. And as well, I too, I have seen solar power on the smaller sites to power some of the equipment that is in the Egmont area under radio, and it works quite well. I'd be very interested just to see how well it works and whether you even need a generator most of the time on a cell site. So this looks like quite an interesting experiment to me. So thank you. I'm just trying to say I'm kind of in favor of it.
All right, thank you, Director Lee. Director Hilts.
Thanks. Yeah, and overall, in support, and my understanding is that in part that this site was triggered by the TELUS Future Friendly Foundation as they own the property. So I had hoped, I suppose, that the salmon inlet would be included in this as to service it. So whether a recommendation could be adjusted to whether TELUS would consider having salmon inlet in the coverage. I'm putting that on the table as a consideration, whether to a little bit of lobbying advocacy for salmon inlet. And in terms of the public process, on page 155, it talks about the local municipality. And I guess I do have a little bit of problem with the TELUS's presentation in that it rolls in the Industry Canada requirements with the SERD requirements, and SERD requirements is not 3 times the structure height. That's an Industry Canada requirement. So I think it's a little bit misleading in the TELUS communication. So I think that could be some feedback to TELUS to separate Industry Canada requirements versus the SERD requirements. So in terms of the recommendation, it's is it reasonable to put a wish to have coverage for salmon inlet? You know, I'm sure the tower is all designed, but not to exclude that part of the seashell inlet waterways.
I would suspect it's more a geology or geography issue than it would be a, putting an antenna pointing that direction issue. I wonder if it has any bearing, like it is an advocacy issue, as you've said, Director Hilts. I don't know that it has any particular bearing on these recommendations as we move forward, though. Did staff or anybody want to chime in on that? Yuli?
Yes, thank you. So I just want to say one thing. So for this particular application, the federal government is seeking for particularly land use concurrence other than advocacy for other locations. So I would suggest and provide such suggestions maybe in a separate manner. Thank you.
After we move these, you're welcome to, Director Hilts, you're welcome to move a recommendation perhaps that we write to TELUS and ask if they've given consideration to coverage on salmon inlet.
Yes, I will do that. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions about the recommendations that we have on the floor? Okay. Rural voting only. All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. Director Hilts?
Yes, I would like to propose a motion that the regional district does send a letter to TELUS and for their future consideration of the salmon inlet aspect of cellular coverage, which would in some ways might lead to the tetrahedron. I'm not sure of how that coverage works, right? It's the that mountain range between Gibson's and Salmon Inlet. So that would a recommendation to write a letter and asking about consideration for Salmon Inlet in their future plans. I think that would be something like that.
All right, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Thank you very much. Any questions, Director Lee?
Yes, I'm in favor of the letter. I could actually put you in contact with the TELUS person that I have been working with to get improved cellular service to the Egmont. So the person I was working with is in charge of the province. So I can help with the contact information on that. But I'm in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you very much. Director McMahon.
Cellular service in rural areas has come up as a major issue due to COVID, particularly in provinces like Saskatchewan, but also here because people are pretty much forced to work from home. And I wonder if there are any opportunities for working with senior government to get funding to improve rural cell service. I would ask, has Director Lee thought about that at all?
Can I add? Yes. Yes, I have been working with the federal and provincial government on getting the cell service to Egmont. So yes, I do have the contacts that if we were looking for improved cell service in some particular area, I believe they would be the same contacts that I've been working with. I'd be happy to share my contacts, and if anybody would like to do a little advocacy for their areas, I'm more than happy to arrange that.
Director McMahon, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm wondering if staff might keep an eye out for any grant opportunities that would be coming up. Of course, I guess we wouldn't be leading that. I don't know if there's, what opportunities do you see on the horizon, if any? Because I keep hearing about governments looking for shovel-ready projects that they can move forward as part of the COVID recovery. So is this an area that we could look into at all?
I don't know if staff have an answer for that for us right now. Mr. Hall or CEO McKinley?
Yes, we can certainly look and see if there's any potential opportunities that might fit and report back.
Great, thank you very much. Director Pratt.
We recently, and I'm going to have to go back and check my my calendar exactly for when it was, but there was a members of this board, or and I can't even remember who it was in the meeting, but within the last couple of months, we have had an update on the TELUS, on what TELUS has planned for along the corridor of 101 to increase cellular coverage. There are plans for some smaller cell towers. There's some challenges around with the mountain and the rock faces, but there's already a plan in place for increasing coverage along the corridor. I'll come back and I'll find my notes and make sure that anyone who was not part of that meeting got that. But I would certainly, I'm very, being someone who has like usually typically one bar at my house of service, not just one bar. But I'm more than happy to do more advocacy on this as well.
Thank you. Director Hilts?
We voted on the motion on the floor?
No, we haven't yet. People keep putting their hands up.
If we could vote in, and then I have one general comment about remote areas and internet access.
Okay, Director Lee, do you have a question or comment related to the motion on the floor?
No, be good to vote, and then we can just finish discussing the advocacy after that.
Perfect. I may need CEO McKinley's help here. I believe this is voting all because it is just an advocacy thing. It's not specifically related to a service.
I believe you're right, and I apologize. My headphones just died, and I can't seem to get it to go on speaker, so I'm struggling to hear a little bit. And so if you see me doing weird things with the phone, it's just getting it closer to my ear.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is voting all. All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Director Lee, you still have your hand up. So I thought Director Hilts had something to say, but he put his hand down. So Director Lee.
Yes, I remember the advocacy piece. We had attendance by the people that I was dealing with for the Egmont, and we invited all board members to the room next to us to get an update from them. I do believe that the situation has changed slightly because of the COVID-19. There is opportunity for increased grants that were not available before. So it probably would be good if we did want a repeat of what Lori was just discussing. and staff were to approach TELUS, I believe they would come back and talk about it. So I don't know if we want to make a motion or if it's just something that would happen because we'd like to have it.
I don't know if we need a motion to specifically invite TELUS back to discuss infrastructure planning. Director Hilts?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about Seashell Inlet, and this is really going to be a game changer for Seashell Inlet in terms of properties along there, which I think has proven itself in kind of the Keats and Gambier Island, that as this service improves, the use of on the land base and the water base is going to increase. And I don't know if Director Seegers has any input, but years ago, the District of Seashell had a Seashell Inlet plan of having a trail going down the west side at one time. And I don't know if there's any status on that project, which was, it's got to be 15 or 20 years ago that report came out.
Director Seegers?
No, not at this point. Some of those are still sitting out there, but nobody's really moved anything forward. So it'd be interesting to see what the impact of this is.
All right. Director Hilts, did you have anything further? Your hand is still up. Okay. If that's everything, we're going to move on to Annex G, page 163 in our agenda. District of Seashell OCP and zoning bylaw amendment referral, Trellis Senior Services. I see Yuli, you're going to speak to this one as well.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the Trellis Seniors Care Facility proposal in the District of Seashell has no land use implications for the SCRD. It is recommended that the SCRD's comments related to waste collection and reduction, development cost charge and water servicing requirements, and transit service and community recreation be provided to the District of Seashell. And to meet the deadline set by the District of Seashell, this recommendation need to be forwarded to the board meeting today for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to, before I let anybody else go, Chair's prerogative, the $201,300 in DCCs, is that just water or are there other DCCs within that number?
Thanks, Chair. So that's the DCC is only for water. The exact amount will be calculated again at the development permit stage to reflect any changes. And additionally, the developer has to pay for the water system modeling. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought it was just water because Seashell's collecting a number of DCCs on this as well. So I just wanted to make sure that I had that right. Director Seegers.
Thank you. 2 points. In the recommendations, number 4 talks about low impact development landscaping principles. I know that the District of Seashell has requested a landscape plan for this property. So this will need to be incorporated into that. That's good. Number 5, though, I have a question about site design to accommodate a bus pullout in consultation with SCRD Transit Division is required. I don't know if this actual property, like this piece of property, will actually be on the bus route. It's close to the bus route, but if you look at where the bus goes up in here, it comes up to Derby and turns left. And this property, I believe, is just to the right of that corner. So I don't know how they would fulfill on this. So that would be, I mean, we can request it, but if it's the property beside and not this property, how would we ensure that this was actually in place?
Remco?
Thank you for the question, Director. It could be possible for us to, if required, in consultation with the developer, if desired, change the route to actually make the loop and actually have a bus stop in front of the facility. And this bus loop would allow that change to be made. And we feel that it might be worthwhile at least to have a discussion about it with the developer.
Okay, thank you. Director Hilts.
Yeah, that was on my list there. In terms of the transit on page 165, it talked about the plan to go up that, and so we don't really have a timeline for that. So that was about the coincidence of these, the building and the transit, and whether that exists, that recommendation was needed. But the timeline of the transit is the question.
Thank you for the question. Actually, Route 2 is already going up, Cowrie and on Derby as we speak.
So it'd be a minor adjustment somewhere down the road to the routing to accommodate picking up at that facility.
Yeah.
Okay.
Meters.
Thank you. Director Hilts, did you have a follow-up? Your hand is still up. Thank you. Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I had no idea that that the District of Sechelt has a planner named Ian Hall. I found that kind of amusing. But my question is when is the review of DCCs slated to hit our agendas? And now that we don't see a lot of DCC applications, and this is one of them.
I don't know who wants to answer that. Remco, you've got your hand up.
I assume you're referring to the DCC bylaw and not the DCC for this particular project? Okay. I think we indicated before, early on in the meeting, that the DCC bylaw is currently scheduled for review once we have a clear understanding of what the actual costs are associated with expansions, as well as that we have our asset management completed. We can do it earlier, however, then we need to do it twice within a time frame of 5 years. And there is a lot of work involved in a DCC review, including public participation. So currently, we are planning to start that work in 2022, 2023. We could do it earlier, but then we need to do it at a later time again.
Thank you for that. Director Seegers.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to reiterate Remco's comment. The bus does go by. So when we switched it to go by the high school, it actually is going right by this site now. So we do need to have some kind of bus pickup at that location, because one of the community pieces that they gave us lots of feedback on was that we needed to ensure that there was public transit by there for those working there or visiting there, etc. My concern at this point is just the location of the actual pullout. I don't know how that will work in there, but I'm sure staff will sort that out. Thanks.
We'll be ripping up our brand new asphalt to accommodate it. We do have some recommendations here. Would anybody like to move the recommendations? This is regional, so it's all. Director Seegers, you're going to move those. Would somebody like to second? Director Pratt. Any further questions or comments before we vote? No? All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex H. Give me a sec here to get my page. Provincial referral for private moorage. Watton. Julie Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. Each of the next two reports are moorages from the province within the Pender Harbour Dock Management Plan area. This particular report is for a private moorage on the east side of the Francis Peninsula. It is consistent with the application requirements by the Sechelt Nation and by the province. SCRD does not have zoning over the water in this area. Staff wanted to draw the province's attention to the fact that the adjacent properties to the applicants do not have moorages currently, and highlight an opportunity potentially for shared moorage facility here. Beyond that, staff have no objections to this application, subject to the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Director Lee.
Area A does indeed have some regulations over the water, but it's for commercial marina only, and it says you got to tie your boat on one side of a dock. So there is some regulations over the water, some zoning of the water. The APC and the OCP both have asked for there to be a further study done to investigate zoning over the water in Pender Harbor, and I trust that's going to occur soon. It's quite an outstanding issue. In this particular request, the APC has considered it and believes it's that we should accept the recommendations as submitted. So I would like to make that motion.
All right, moved by Director Lee, seconded by Director Hilts. Rural areas only. Any other questions or comments? No? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex I, provincial referral for strata moorage, Sun Access William Island Investments, Inc. Julie sort of hinted that these were both moorage, fairly similar. Was there anything you wanted to add to this one?
Thank you, Chair. No, only to remind the committee that this is indeed an application for shared or strata moorage. The location of Williams Island, just for reference, is north of Francis Peninsula and south of Irving's Landing.
Thank you very much. Director Lee.
This one is a little different than the previous one in that it's actually located within one of the entrances to Pender Harbor, one of the less used entrances, but very commonly used by the locals with up to 40-foot fish boats, quite regular, because it's a shortcut if you're coming from the Half Moon Bay area or the Vancouver area, so they cut through there instead of going around to the main channel. This hasn't been in front of our APC, so I don't know what they think about it. So my first question is, could we wait for APC comments before replying? And my second question is, can we specifically recommend that it be referred to Transport Canada to ensure that there is no impediment to traffic from this installation? So 2 questions.
All right. Julie, did you want to address those?
Thank you for the questions. On the note of the first question, staff have recommended responding to the province based on the timeline and including or forwarding APC comments after the fact. And on the second question of Transport Canada, I would expect they would be referred also in this process, but the committee is the committee could make a recommendation along those lines if you wish.
Director Lee.
Okay, I've been very clear that I don't like APC comments after we make a decision. It's not the right way to do a referral to a citizens group. And I believe that we should be asking for extensions that allow for that to occur before we make recommendations. Local knowledge in applications such as this is quite an important component. But I'm pretty sure, well, I shouldn't talk for the APC. I guess comments after is how we have been running it historically, and I really wish we could get our process refined a little bit so that we don't continually bump into this, but I guess that's something that I'd be interested to see if that's staff consider that a possibility for future ones.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Staff like, as much as anyone, to have an orderly process that follows a standard set of steps and results in a tidy and complete package. But as staff have explained to the committee in the past, the province's timelines don't always sync with ours. And although we can be granted extensions, as was the case on this particular file, those extensions tend to be limited and don't always allow time for our preferred order of steps. But staff are working on a staff report about some process improvements that will be coming forward to a future committee and may address the director's concern. And just to specific to this referral, it's probable that APC comments will be provided to the province before the deadline of May 31st, but those minutes won't appear on an agenda for this committee until June. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Clark, I saw you put your hand up. Did you have anything you wanted to add, or has Mr. Hall covered it off?
Thank you. The only other piece I was going to draw attention to is that we refer and ask for APC comments predominantly around our service areas and around the zoning aspects, and without residential or W1 type zoning over the water. In this particular case, I was looking at the other opportunities that the public also has to provide comment direct to the province on their web portal. So I just wanted to ensure the committee's awareness and anybody else who may be watching that there is an opportunity for every single provincial referral for members of the public, including APC members, to respond directly to the province with local knowledge. And that's a really valuable portal and way for the province to hear your comments one by one.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, a couple of things. The opportunity for everyone to comment should be part of the training coming up for the APCs, because I certainly have a lot of members who are new. But I'm glad to hear that staff are looking at processes, because frankly, if we can't improve the province's processes, then perhaps we need to improve our processes. And you know, APCs, now that we're meeting online, it's making it a lot easier to put together a meeting, and maybe we can call occasional extra meetings of APCs when there is something important to the community that they should be able to comment on before it comes to the board. So I'm just putting that out there.
Thank you for that. Director Hilts.
Thanks. Further to Director Lee, did you want to do an add that subject to Transport Canada's review of the vessel traffic? Is that something you wanted to add to the recommendation?
Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if staff feels that was appropriate, I'd be happy to add that. But I'd like to hear from staff if they think it is appropriate and necessary.
GM Hall.
Thank you. Tricky question to answer, because it is the committee's prerogative to add comments, as our senior planner said. But just to pick up on Ms. Clark's last point, we do constrain our referral comments to our service areas, and since marine navigation is not our service, no comment is provided. But as Julie said, committee's prerogative if it's something you'd like to add.
Director Lee, did you want to follow up with that, or can we keep going through the speaker list?
Let's go to the speaker list. I was busy thinking about it. I must say, though, I really liked Donna's suggestion now that we do have Zoom and we can call a meeting in very short order without with very little inconvenience to the members. So that sounds like a pretty good idea.
Thank you. Director Seegers.
Thank you. Further to Julie's comment about members of the public being able to provide input, I know that in most cases these are in the paper so that there's a notice of some sort for people in the community. But how else? If they don't see that, maybe they're a part-time resident or whatever, how does the community become aware of those referrals and then the avenues to provide input and comment?
Steph?
Thank you for the question. To the best of my knowledge, the primary way that residents learn about it are those ads in the paper. Staff have adopted the practice in the last few months of embedding the direct link to the web portal, which is advertised in the newspaper. The province has a very functional online portal where you can look at all the information for, it's very similar to our GIS tools that are public facing. You can look at all of the provincial applications for use of provincial land. You can get information about the specific uses proposed and the timeline of the tenure or the license of application. So this is a very functional way for neighbors to get to know what's happening or what's proposed to happen in their area. One challenge that staff have observed is that it's not widely known amongst our community that that very functional portal for information exists. And so this is why staff have adopted the practice in the last few months of embedding that portal right in our staff reports, a direct link to that portal for providing feedback. The one challenge I will note around that is that residents don't always know to look to our reports for that. And often our reports are made public towards the end of the public feedback time. And we are always asking for extensions because our processes don't align with the timelines that they offer. And so a future advocacy piece is to let the province know that more awareness is needed in our community of that portal. Thank you.
It was only in reviewing this application that I discovered that portal even existed for myself, and I spent like an hour and a half last night looking at all of the referrals in the province. So it is a very versatile tool. Director Seegers, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could make a note that there are two other avenues that we may have that are available to us to allow the community to know about this. One would be we're redeveloping our website. So if there are referrals that come to us that we're looking to inform the community about, we could have someplace on the website potentially with that link that you're talking about ahead of time before it shows up in a report. And the other is we have an SCRD app, do we not? Where I think we have one, don't we? Where information comes out. If we were to make that functional for residents, that when referrals come, that community has the ability to have input, that would be part of something that gets pushed out in an app. It could potentially have more of the residents in the area, sign up for something like that and make it more functional.
Good points. Director Pratt.
Thank you. Just to go back to the to Director Lee's question, or the thought about putting in another and that with other advocacy pieces, is I go back to the meeting the CAO and I had at in Victoria with the Ministry of Transportation, and getting very clearly told that when we get referrals in, that government agencies and government ministries do not necessarily talk to one another. So putting in any additional information or say, hey, this should also go, or this is something else that we know that's happening, because the agencies don't talk to one another and different levels of government don't always talk to one another. So I see nothing wrong with putting in any and that further information go back and forth. So just to support that.
All right, thank you. Director Lee.
Hey, Mark, do you want to try that and that again? You had it nailed pretty good.
Director Hilts.
And that it's about Transport Canada and vessel traffic, something about confirmation of no impediment to vessel traffic was the language I was kind of, I think what you were trying to say is that this facility should not impede the vessel traffic and that Transport Canada needs to ensure that, and that the provincial government needs to check with the federal government before they allow this to go through. That's the concept.
Director Lee.
Did our recording secretary get something that sounds like that?
That's a good question. Recording secretary?
Hi there. I got, and that this facility should not impede vessel traffic, and that the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development advised Transport Canada of this application, a proposed application.
Director Lee.
I'd like to make that motion that we add that and that.
So all of the recommendations with that further and that the recording secretary has given us?
Yes.
Director Seegers, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I don't know if that recommendation goes quite far enough for what the committee's looking at. We don't want to just inform Transport Canada. We want Transport Canada to provide confirmation that this installation will not impede traffic. So they should check with Transport Canada and ensure that it doesn't impede it, not just inform them.
I wonder if we've got the ability to bind Transport Canada to have to answer to that referral, 1, and 2, the timeline on Transport Canada responding to that referral.
No, I don't think we do, but I think we want, that's what we're saying. Don't just tell them it's happening. You know, seek out the information so that, I mean, are we going to hold them to that? No, but we're making them aware of it, which is, you know, to Director Pratt's comment.
Right. Director Lee?
I'd like to hear from Director Pratt. I think I can see she's been doing some writing here.
Okay, Director Pratt.
I think for me the term navigational keeps coming up because it's more than just vehicle traffic. It's also about the navigational hazards. I'm going to look to Director Kroll because he's our resident water guy.
Thank you. The thing I'm questioning here, the applicant presumably has a lease, a water lease, to put in front of their property, and then they're now applying to put a dock in. So anytime that any structure is put into a water lease area, my understanding is it has to go before Transport Canada, who deem whether or not it is navigable waters, and they would make a ruling based on that, whether they would allow the structure to go forward. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So what I'm saying here is the applicant here, I would assume, has a lease, a water lease in front of their property. And as soon as they want to put any structure into that, it has to go before Transport Canada, and they make an application, and Transport Canada assesses whether it is a navigable waterway. I just went through it in Gibson's with our boathouse for search and rescue. I had to make an application to Transport Canada, who deemed Gibson's Harbor as a navigable waterway, and I got sort of a rider on our application with a permit number that allowed us to proceed with building the structure.
Director Seegers, I saw you shaking your head there. Did you?
Yeah, I refer to Julie because Julie was shaking her head that they don't have a water lease.
Ms. Clark?
Thank you for the question. I believe the process is different in a residential context, in that the applicant does not need to have a lease first. They're applying for tenure over the water, in which the dock would rest. And so they're one in the same type application when it's residential. And to be honest to you, I don't know what the thresholds are for when it's referred to Transport Canada, but that might be the next step to ensure that referral happened.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Yes, I think it was pretty much answered. The way that it works is that this is not an existing lease and a replacement dock system. It's actually an application for a lease and permission to put in a dock. And I was surprised to see that the applicant hadn't recorded the fact that they'd already checked with Transport Canada. And I also was a little dismayed to see that the picture that they provided did not show a buoy that's in the middle of the channel and makes the channel much narrower. And it was not in the application either. So that's why I would like to see it mentioned that Flinro should be asking for Transport Canada approval prior to issuing the lease. So that's what I'd like the recommendation to say.
Rather than inform, you wanted to specifically say referred to Transport Canada for approval.
We recommend that it be referred to Transport Canada for approval prior to the lease being issued.
Okay. Did you want to hear that read out again? I mean, you've moved it. You've moved the recommendations. A little bit of wordsmithing. I haven't actually had them seconded yet. Did you want to have that read out first?
Yes.
Okay. Can we have that read, please?
I have, and that the ministry referred the application to Transport Canada for approval prior to the lease being approved.
Thank you. Does that cover off, Director Lee?
Yes, I'd like to make that recommendation.
Okay, seconder for that, or for all of the recommendations, including the one that has been added on. Director McMahon, thank you. Any other questions? Director Lee, I see your hand is still up. Thank you. This is rural voting only. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Annex J has been withdrawn, so it was deleted from our agenda. So moving on to Annex K, item 14, development variance permit, Magnuson Ford. Hand that over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. This development variance permit application is requesting to vary zoning bylaw to reduce the required side yard setback, and that's the side yard contiguous to the highway, from 4.5 meters to 2 meters to permit an addition and an alteration to an existing single family dwelling, and to permit the construction of a new detached auxiliary dwelling at the rear of the lot. This results in a variance of 2.5 meters for the proposed construction. MOTI has issued a setback permit for this property authorizing the setback reduction. This went to that Westhouse Sound APC on April 28th, and they recommended approval. We've received one letter of concern about recreational vehicles parked on the roadway, causing interruption to sight lines and potential issues on the property. However, the proposed accessory building or auxiliary building is intended to house the recreational vehicles on site. Planning staff recommend issuance of this development variance permit, number DVP 00057.
Great. Thank you very much. Director Hilts. You're muted, Director Hilts.
Thank you. I'm getting my hand in my mute's getting. Came to the APC first Zoom meeting that we had. Overall, it improves the private property. We get some fire smart siding, it removes encroachment structures, improves the livability, and seems to address the mitigation issue of right-of-way parking. So I'm supportive and happy to move the recommendations as presented.
Great, thank you very much. Is there a seconder? Seconded, Director Ties. Okay, any other questions, comments? No, rural directors only. All those in favor? That's carried. Director Ties, your hand keeps disappearing, but I think you had it up. Moving on to Annex L, Development Variance Permit Mulligan for Corbett. Steph.
Thank you again, Chair. This development variance permit application is associated with concurrent development variance permit application for the adjacent property. They are due to the fact that the goal of the application is to vary the internal and adjoining lot lines for both 8631 and 8629 Red Roofs Road to facilitate the construction of a covered walkway connecting the two recently constructed single-family dwellings. Both of the properties are owned by the same owner, and the dwellings are intended to house extended family. The walkway is intended to serve as a convenient connection between the houses. The applications are treated separately for administrative cleanliness, since the permits will be individually registered over each parcel. The applicant is requesting to reduce the required side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 0 meters to permit the recently constructed walkway connecting to the adjacent parcel at 8629 Red Roofs Road. This moves us into the concurrent application for DBP 59, where the applicant is requesting the variance to reduce the side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 0 meters to permit the recently constructed covered walkway connecting to the adjacent parcel at 8631 Red Roofs Road. So staff recommends support for the variance application for both properties.
Thank you very much. Just before I go to the speakers list, I've got a question. This development variance permit with the side yard setback being reduced to 0 applies to these structures only, or the entire length of the parcel?
Thank you for the question. It applies only to these structures, and that is identified specifically on the site plan, as we typically do for development variance permits.
Perfect. I just wanted that clarified. Thank you very much. Director Pratt.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm sensing there seems to always be a little bit of a trend of the, construct first, ask permission after, or maybe it's just the theme of the day. I don't know, but my APC did have some concerns around fire risk, which were, of course, they had answered. I just want to bring that up because you'll see that in the notes later on. I think for me, because these are two different properties, has the owner mentioned anything about potentially merging the properties into one? Because I'm thinking of future use. At some point, these properties may sell, or they're most likely to sell. And then what happens then when you've got two properties that are essentially merged at this one point, yet they're not legally merged? So, question for staff.
That's a great question. Thank you, Chair. Staff thought a lot about this specific scenario and whether or not we would or should consider an easement between the two properties, or to allow for legal movement between the two properties. But because an easement is a person-to-person agreement, and both properties are owned by one individual with the intention of serving family primarily, an easement with with just one person-to-person being the same person, staff didn't feel that was necessary. In the future, if the owner decides to sell one or both of the properties, I understand that the covered walkway structure is designed to be easily removed so that both properties would be completely independent of one another. And that would be obviously I would think the goal of any potential buyer of either property wouldn't want to be physically connected by a roof structure to the adjacent owner. In addition, any independent sale of either lot would require potentially a driveway over, I believe it's 8629 Red Roofs Road, because at the moment they share one driveway. So there are a few things the owner would need to do if they anticipated or if they planned on selling either property independent of one another.
So a future realtor's problem.
Correct.
Perfect. Director Ties.
My question is, how can we have the recommendation to follow Shishal Nation request to do an archaeological study when the walkway has already been constructed?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I understand that Shishal Nation has been involved with this owner. The land hasn't necessarily been disturbed in the ground as much as that as fill has been placed over top of the land. But moving forward, the owner is going to be working directly with the nation. That process is ongoing.
Thank you. Director Seegers.
If this covered walkway is removed at some point, are the properties then in compliance with the required setbacks?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, they will be in compliance with the 1.5 meter side yard setback required by the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Director Hilts.
Thanks. I'm going to piggyback on Director Pratt's aspect of the timing of these issues. I read in the applicant's rationale letter, which says that we wanted to build it and we didn't have enough time, and the drawing is from July 2019. So they had, this is where what I'm feeling is that somewhere there is this idea with the regional district from builders is that this is normal procedure to kind of go ahead. Whereas in the district of Sechelt, clearly when there's a building permit, you're not supposed to excavate, you're not supposed to essentially touch anything before you get going. Whereas I keep hearing that, well, we kind of do a little bit and then we ask, and then we do a little bit more and then we ask. So I'm wondering about the outreach to the contractors who seem to be driving this. The contractor is speaking for the applicant. It certainly seems to be a contractor responsibility as delegated by the owner. So I'm wondering, is there a procedure that we're missing, that why these, it does seem that we nearly had 5 on the agenda. Is there something missing in the procedures that lead to this situation that we're in?
Staff, if you can.
That's a really terrific question. I'll try to answer just part of it, and maybe General Manager Ian Hall can speak to the rest of it. I know that the building permit was issued only on each property, only for the single family dwellings, that we have a drawing for the covered walkway, but a building permit for that covered walkway has not been issued. So they were able to proceed with the construction of the dwellings, but at this time, until they receive approval or otherwise from the board, we haven't issued the covered walkway building permit.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
So this would be, will there be a penalty assessed on this permit for the covered walkway? Will that penalty be assessed?
Building permits, thank you for the question. Building permits after the fact pay double the fee. So that is a penalty for the builder.
Thank you. GM Hall, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you have anything you wanted to add on?
I always like to mention, because the more mentions and the more opportunities to get the message out, the better. And this both is a partial response to Director Hilts' question and a partial response to Director Ties' earlier comment that all property owners are bound by the Provincial Heritage Conservation Act, and that's regardless of whether you're disturbing ground, covering ground for something that has a building permit or doesn't. And that message is one that our staff are always trying to get out to the development community, be they professional home builders or people doing their own projects. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Yes, I was going to echo what GM Hall said there. We have instances in my area where the work was done without checking with the heritage part of it. There is fairly substantial penalties for doing so, including I've seen stop work orders issued, and I've seen a very expensive study that had to be paid for before the stop work order would be lifted. It is a challenge because in that you could get your heritage done, you could dig the foundation and then apply for a building permit prior to pouring the cement. And that's kind of an old practice, but it's still part of the process that we have got now. Still maybe a hole, but I think all the professional builders understand it quite well. And in this case, when you look at the picture, it looks like it's been dug. So I'm very interested in what's going to actually happen here, but that's not, I don't believe that that's up to us to make that decision. That is under the Heritage Act. So.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
I was also very interested in Director Hilts' comment because I can think of a number of fairly major projects around here where they proceeded on the forgiveness versus permission model, and it led to some very contentious situations, one in Area D and one in Area E. My question is, so how much is the building permit? So if you're doubling it, is it a disincentive, a significant disincentive or not?
Steph.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Not working in the building department, I actually don't have an answer for that, but can give.
Director McMahon, did you have a follow-up? Okay, Director Hilts.
Thank you. I'm looking at the picture on page 305, and I'm looking at this concrete structure that goes out in the front, which I assume is also a requirement in the setback. The concrete is a structure, and the setback applies to the concrete. So I'm thinking if I was living there and I've got this nice breezeway, and now the breezeway is kind of a little bit too much breezy and a little bit of glass on each end, and now I have kind of a sunroom space. And so I'm wondering, is there any way to prevent this from happening? Like putting it in the document that this is no further alterations, like one time only. How do we kind of, I'm uncomfortable enough to support this, but I would like to kind of put something that nails it down a bit more. And is there any possibility of doing something like that from a language point of view in the recommendation?
Good question. Does anybody want to try and answer that? Dave, you're muted.
I'll try to answer that question. The proposed variance is specific to the covered walkway, and it is identified specifically in the site plan provided in support of the variance. And then that's what's registered on title. We're very careful when drafting development variance permits to ensure that the variance is granted only for the specifically proposed construction, so that we don't inadvertently allow for a relaxation of an entire property line, for instance. If we were vague about our language, then that certainly does open up the door for essentially defeat of the bylaw by variance. In this case, I believe staff have been careful in the wording of the bylaw. Any proposed enclosure of the concrete area would be, if it was attached to the main dwelling, would be considered an extension of that building and would require a building permit, since any enclosure would be considered a structure. If it was constructed without a building permit, it would be a legal construction, and we would have to go through that in terms of a bylaw enforcement case.
Not that we're ever going to know if they do enclose it in the future, but at least it's sprinklered. Director Pratt.
Thank you. I'm going to move the recommendation on page 296.
All right, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded, Director Lee. Any last comments, questions? No, rural directors only. All those in favor? You're in favor, Director Hilts? Thank you very much. That's carried. Annex M, item 16, same thing, but the other side of the property. Director Pratt?
I will move the recommendation on page 306.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Thank you. Just before we vote, I've got a purely hypothetical question here. What happens if the first one passed and this one fails?
Thank you for that question. They would end up with a covered walkway to the property line and have to remove the covered walkway to the property line on the adjacent property and live with that, I suppose.
All right. Thank you very much. It's just a curiosity. Director Hilts?
Sorry. Okay, I will ask the question. The building bylaw has a $10,000 penalty in it. Is there any ability to use that penalty limit in addition to the doubling of the permit?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to defer to GM Hall for answering that question.
GM Hall.
And the manager's deference is not going to help because I apologize to the committee staff for not anticipating that question and don't have the answer about the limits of how that penalty can be provided, but that is something that staff can look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon. Oh, sorry, Director Hilts, did you have a follow-up to that?
Sure. If I may, has that penalty in anyone's memory, living memory, corporate memory, ever been used?
Chair, I wondered if that might be a follow-up question. In my memory, I am not aware of that penalty being applied. I will say that as a general approach, the regional district always strives to find a path to compliance on building issues, and we, as staff, we have a very good track record considering the number of properties and the number of permits that we issue of bringing our properties into compliance. And in this case, on these particular properties, staff worked with the applicant to find a way and brought that path forward for the committee's decision. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I recognize that depending on your construction, even a $10,000 fine would not be overly significant if you really wanted to proceed with a project. Director McMahon?
Yes, obviously we found a fertile area for discussion, and I'm wondering if we could refer it perhaps to a future lunch and learn or something about building permits and how that works in the rural areas, and maybe differences between how the municipalities may handle it. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you. I saw various staff taking notes, so hopefully somebody will accommodate that in the future for us when we can once again gather for lunch. We did have a motion. It's on the floor. It's been seconded. Rural directors only. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. I was really curious to see if it failed, but save it for another day, I guess. Moving on to Annex N, item number 17. Cell tower project management services contract amendment. Handed over to the manager of protective services.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. So what we have here, there's an ongoing project to upgrade our 911 communication systems. It includes the construction of towers and the installation of equipment. As part of that project, we've had PlanetWorks Consulting contracted by the SCRD for a number of years to sort of at a high level to oversee the development of it. now that we're ready to proceed with construction and installation of equipment, we've expanded the contract of PlanetWorks Consulting to include that work. Rather than go to RFP, we did a notice of intent where we publicly stated we were going to expand the contract to see if there are any objections to us doing so. There were no objections. And so we'll be expanding the contract with PlanetWorks Consulting to the end of 2021 and to include the oversight of these construction projects, the towers, and the installation of this equipment.
All right, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? No? Does anybody want to move? Oh, Director Seegers.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendations as presented.
Perfect. I see multiple seconders. Great. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex O, Homesite Creek Secret Cove Recreation Site, Partnership Agreement and Stewardship Memorandum of Understanding. I assume Kevin Clarkson is speaking to this.
Yes, Chair, and I see Kevin is in the meeting. Kevin, are you able to make yourself heard?
Yes, thank you. I'm assuming.
Not really. You keep cutting in and out.
Hi there. I'm assuming everyone can hear me.
Now we can.
Hi there. I apologize. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, and now we can see you.
Thank you very much. Surprise, surprise, the Parks guy is having technical difficulties. So following the June 27th, 2019 SCRD board resolution, staff have met with representatives from the Half Moon Bay Citizens Association about a possible partnership for shared stewardship.
Speaking of connectivity issues.
Chair, maybe I'll pitch in to help here because we seem to be having a connection issue.
Sure.
So this report follows up on work that was done last year around finding a sustainable way to support stewardship of provincial recreation sites. And at that time, we talked about sprockets as well, if the committee might recall. And so for Homesite Creek, Secret Cove, Homesite Creek, which is the area below the highway in Half Moon Bay, the board directed us to look at a partnership with a community organization as a way forward. And staff have done that. And Kevin, although his connection is poor, was going to explain that we've come up with a way to do this that will work for all the parties involved. And it involves the regional district holding the partnership agreement with the province. So this is similar to Sprockets, and an MOU with the Half Moon Bay Citizens Association to undertake most of the maintenance and management work for the site. And in order to facilitate that, because the Citizens Association doesn't have their own insurance, having them covered as an associate member of our insurance program would enable them to be protected. And so this approach is proposed, and an initial 3-year term is suggested as enough time for everybody to get their feet under them and get things working smoothly, but not so long as to be onerous for anyone that's involved. And thank you for the committee's consideration. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions about this? Director McMahon.
Not a question, just a comment. I think this is a good good contract. Half Moon Bay Group has a long track record in trail maintenance in the area, and I'm really glad to see this going forward.
Thank you for that. Director Hilts.
And I as well. I like the novel approach to the problems that we're having at the time. Is this kind of the first one that the SCRD has gone into to deal with the liability issues? And then the second question is, this would be a Community Parks Function 650 in terms of the funding for this whole project. So two questions.
Whoever would like to take that on.
Thank you, Chair. I believe this is the first associate membership to deal with the insurance issue. It's not the first such arrangement with a third party. We did a similar thing under Kevin's leadership last year with Sprockage and the Coast Mountain Bike Trail Association. But that trail association had their own insurance, and so that addressed that particular situation. And I apologize, there was a second part to the question.
The funding component to it.
Yes, it's Community Parks 650. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else? We do have some recommendations here. It is rural directors. Director Ties.
Happy to move the recommendations as presented.
All right, seconded by Director Pratt. Any last questions, comments? No? All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. We have APC minutes, Annex P, which was a late item, Annex Q, R, and S. Are there any items in there that anybody would like to discuss, pull out? Director Lee.
I would like to discuss recommendation number 2 on page 376B of the Area A minutes.
Okay. Sorry, I've got to pull up another document here. So if you would like to discuss, go ahead.
Director McMahon had her hand up. I was just wondering if she had some comments.
Sure. Director McMahon.
Oh, no. Well, let's deal with Area A first.
Okay, Director Lee.
Okay, this was, to give background, I'm not sure everybody was aware of the issue here. And so there was a provincial referral for the Seychelles proposed names, Area A and D, to our respective APCs. I don't know if Area D has actually considered it yet. I don't think it's gone to them yet. But our APC, I got 3 questions, but I'll ask them one at a time here. And it's for staff. There's a referral to our APCs made to ask for comments, and near as we can tell, it's whether our systems can accommodate the spelling of the proposed names. And the APC is wondering why we should answer separately from all the others questions that needed to be answered yet. And the system changes really have no interest to the APC or the affected residents here. I suspect it's true of Area D, but I can't talk for that. But I'm also not aware of agreed upon timeline for events to occur prior to the SCRD responding. I don't think there's a need to respond at this time. And I'd really like to see an agreed upon timeline of events that is going to occur before we respond, which I understand to be, oh, heck, I forget, it's August something.
August 20th?
Yes. So I was wondering if staff could comment on that, if there's something I'm not aware of.
GM Hall.
Thank you, Chair. So the The last time that the committee considered this matter, there was discussion that, and the CAO made some comments that staff had gathered information from the community and heard from some directors that the process around this, the name change referral was unclear, and the CAO had secured a willingness from the province to come and make a presentation about the matter. And then we had a pandemic. And so the timeline is, as Director Seegers mentioned, has been extended to the end of August. And we'll look forward to having, to taking the province up on their offer to speak with the committee before then, in order to be able to provide comments prior to that timeline. And just in terms of the specific question that SCRD was referred by the province, it wasn't just about spelling. The question was, is there a reason why the names are not appropriate? And a tricky question to consider, but staff looked at it from all angles, and particularly the technical angles for our services, such as our emergency program. And so the comments that were included in staff's report that has been advanced to the APCs are staff's attempt to answer the specific question that was put to the regional district. Staff do understand that there are concerns in the community beyond that one question that was put to the regional district. Thank you.
CAO McKinley, I saw you'd unmuted yourself. Did you have anything?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Further to that, and thank you for that explanation, Ian, I'll be reaching back out to the same folks to discuss rescheduling of the board presentation and coordinating that, and I'll be able to report back on some proposed dates.
I think a presentation from the province, and it's a provincial toponymist, would probably go a long ways in helping us understand what's going on here. Director Lee, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, let me. The Jennifer Goad sent us a communications which was presented to the board, and in that she suggested that one of the duties of the SCRD is for the SCRD to gather up comments from the affected communities so that we can prepare an appropriate response. I'm getting, I've got 50 emails now so far from my constituents without asking for any comments. I was hoping perhaps there was some way that we could communicate saying, hey, we are going to ask you, but we're not quite ready yet. And maybe this is the format to do that, but I'd like to see if staff could help me with this, because otherwise I've got to keep gathering up all these comments, and theoretically I should be saying thank you for them, but there's too many. I can barely keep track of them. I wouldn't mind if there was someone in the staff group that could help with this aspect of it. I was just wondering what the thoughts are on that.
If I might suggest, Director Lee, I'm happy to take this offline with staff. I'll have a discussion with GM Hall about it, and we will contact you and come up with a solution that works.
Thank you for that, CAO. Director Lee, did you have another follow-up, or can we go to Director McMahon and then come back?
Yes, let's see Director McMahon's. Okay,
Director McMahon.
We've met the agronomist, and now we're going to meet the toponymist. This is good. I just, regarding the area e-minutes, I just wanted to thank Planner Julie Clark for attending our last APC meeting. Now that we're doing this on Zoom, hoping that we can more often have some attendance from planning staff to help our APC work their way through some of these issues that we're not very familiar with, and understanding the referral process and the limits of the mandate, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Director Lee.
I hate to continue with the discussion, but I'd like to make the board aware on this issue that I really feel, and so does the APC, that we should establish our own working group to effectively implement this work item, which has been mandated by the recently signed foundation agreement. And I feel, and they feel, if discussions between the proponent, which is the Seashell Nation, and representatives from the affected community could result in identifying more significant and more appropriate places to name or rename. And really in the Pender Harbor area, the possibilities are endless. And it could include things like Salalis Provincial Park instead of Francis Peninsula Provincial Park. Maybe even a new name for my electoral area like Kaplan and Egmont. But I would like to see the two communities explore that kind of thing together. And I wanted to say that because I believe that was the intent of my APC with the last comment, in that committed as we are to the reconciliation, true reconciliation should be a positive process for all parties. So I would ask that if staff, while they're getting ready for this kind of stuff, could investigate whether that is a possibility in the process of making that happen.
Thank you. Did CEO McKinley or GM Hall want to? You've identified it. You've written it down. You'll follow up offline.
Yeah, we're happy to follow up with that piece as well.
Okay, thank you. Director Hilts.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple comments on the Area F meeting, and the Zoom meeting was, I think, received quite enthusiastically. The one difficulty was juggling the paper and the electronic and not having two devices. So this is, and people were asking about paper copies of particularly report recommendations, not necessarily minutes. So, and I think that's made its way through the recording secretary up into planning staff, I believe. And particularly issues which were difficult were dealing with in one of the delegations were understanding the difference between parcel site coverage and gross floor area and unit measurements of square feet and square meters. There was, it really tripped up the dialogue between the delegation and the report and Zoom. And we all kind of had it all, you know, we didn't control the timing of all this. So, and out of that came, in the APC bylaw 53453, it talks about APC members being paid reasonable and necessary expenses arising out of performing their duties. So whether it's possible for, you know, we don't know how long this is going to go on, this type of meeting, the way we are, if can printing costs for APC members be one of the expenses, and it just seems like an accounting difficulty having small incremental printing, or it's something that for moving forward in this, in the new COVID lifestyle, as we're calling it, how to manage when people aren't all adequately electronic device savvy or available. So it's a general comment. I'm wondering if other APCs, how they responded to the Zoom and the paper and the electronic. So,
Director McMahon.
I can say that our APC already has a system set up whereby some people pick up paper copies of the agenda. And so obviously there's a system in place for that. And I asked whether they wanted to still get that, and I got some yeses back that they still do. We had better attendance at the last APC meeting than I think I've seen since I was elected. So obviously Zoom is a hit. I think it's more convenient for people. And I would like to see us probably continue on that platform going forward, maybe meet in person once a year, but otherwise Zoom.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Printed agendas are certainly an item for some people who are not internet savvy. I know not pursuant to APCs, but I know that I'd put a resident of Gibson's in touch with Director Kroll over agenda copies and not being able to participate electronically in meetings. So that's good to know that there is something available for APC members still, even in this. Director Hilts?
Sure. So that service still exists then, that paper copies can be requested still? There was some confusion whether that was still an opportunity for people.
I don't know who wants to answer that. GM Hall?
I will defer to my manager here, but will say that paper copies were available, and staff have taken some steps to try to adapt our processes while while dealing with a closed administration office. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question, Chair. And it's an interesting one, and thanks, Ian. We recently were asked by only one APC member for a printed copy of the agenda, and given the period that we're currently in, we mentioned that at this time, electronic copies were the only copies that would be provided to APCs, and I recognize that we're certainly in a transition period, transitioning away from our paper model and moving more into an electronic one. And certainly there would be a lag time, I think, in that. And it would be, as we move forward, I anticipate that there would be less and less demand for paper copies as people adapt to kind of a more post-COVID way of operating, for lack of a better term. And it would be preferable to continue to transition to an all digital model, since the uptake on Zoom meetings, as well as the digital model, certainly makes it easier and more cost effective for everybody, and reduces our demand on paper and also our costs on paper. But it's always, of course, the board's prerogative to direct staff to provide paper copies of agendas to the APCs.
GM Hall?
If I may, Chair, thank you. And just at the level of principle, I wouldn't take April or May as examples of our sort of preferred state. We're still very much finding a way to make things work. But staff take note of the question, and obviously we want to support our APC members to succeed. And so if we need to adapt our old process to something new, hopefully we can do that in a way that actually improves access and participation. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Does that basically cover you off, Director Hilts?
Would it be appropriate for the chairs of the APCs, who should they kind of contact to kind of coordinate us through this transition time? Should the APC stand alone, so the chair would reach out to who for to ensure that this works? Who would be speaking with?
Thank you for the question. I would think it would be the chairs of the APCs that would reach out to Genevieve Dixon. She's our administrative support in the planning department.
Great, thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Our APC can get hard copies from the Water Board office, and there is still a few older members of the APC that like the paper. But in fact, in this day and age, the way we are operating now, I have two computers. I just happen to have two computers, and the one is open as if it was a paper copy, and the other one is managing myself as I deal with the meeting here. But our APCs, you can't really expect everyone to have 2 computers, and that is the most effective way. We went paperless in our boardroom, but that is because we don't have to manage the Zoom application at the same time. So that's just my comments. But I don't think we're quite ready to eliminate the paper entirely from our APCs.
Thank you. Director Seegers.
Sir, I was going to reiterate or say the same thing as Director Lee. I mean, right now I have 3 devices here because I'm, doing different things. But depends on which meeting I'm in. If I'm in the SCRD meeting, I'm using my Surface, which is provided for my agenda. I don't use that for the Zoom portion. And if I'm, District Seashell meeting, I'm using a different device as well. So I always have 2 devices up. I do print out the order paper, so I have that in front of me. But other than that, I don't have to print. But so if we eliminate paper for all of our committees, then we are assuming that they actually have 2 devices or another screen or something to be able to do that. So that's another consideration.
I was just going to add on that I'm actually trying to do everything all on one monitor here. I've got my computer with a widescreen monitor, and so I've got Zoom on the left and the agenda on the right, and participants and comments right down the center. So it works if you've got a big enough screen, but I recognize that a lot of people don't even have computers anymore or ever. And so certainly Zoom does not play as nicely on an iPad. So were there any other comments or anything out of the APC minutes? No? Okay. Moving on. We do have 2 items of communications. Did anybody want to address anything from either of those? Director Hilts?
Thanks. It was on page 388 from Ms. Clark is asking the SCRD board to remove the Reed Road Forest from the BCTS, and that seems to be a bit out of our lane. So is it clear where the SCRD's responsibility is and others for this? I don't know the individual. So if perhaps someone knows something about that.
Director McMahon.
The Residents Association will be asking the SCRD to write to the minister to have the block removed from BCTS. But yeah, so it's just a confusion of jurisdiction.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
I was just going to suggest that we just maybe write a letter back, just clarifying with the individual that it's not actually our purview to remove something from BCTS inventory, just clarifying the details. And probably be best in the worded as a motion. So so I move that we just write a letter back to and clarifying details.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Thank you. Director McMahon, did you want to speak to the motion on writing a letter back?
Sure, that would be fine. I was going to volunteer to contact the individual, but I see that she addressed us as board of directors, so that's probably the appropriate avenue.
Okay.
That should say the board chair, I guess.
The board chair will write a letter in response to this, clarifying details. Thank you. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Anything else out of the communications? No. Bear with me 1 second while I get my order paper back. Okay, we have no new business. Oh, Director McMahon, sorry, I did not see your hand.
Yeah, I just had a question. Because the province has now allowed us to hold public hearings electronically, Have planning staff got any timeline on the short-term rentals public hearing? Do we want to go forward with that now? What's the general feeling on that one?
Who would like to address
that? Thank you. I will do my best to address that. Staff are indeed working on procedures to support safe and accessible public hearings following the province's announcement that electronic hearings are acceptable. And now that we have the preliminary details for a restart plan, looking at how those procedures synchronize with that plan, and staff will be looking to bring forward some recommendations for timing in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, no other new business. We do have an in-camera section. So I'd like a motion that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with section 90, 1A of the community charter. Personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. Moved. Seconded. All those in favor? Okay. And just before we go into the closed session, do we have any questions from the gallery?
Thank you, Chair. We have two questions.
GM Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that the applicant for one of the earlier DVPs is in the gallery and had sort of raised his hand, so to speak, to staff, indicating interest in asking a question or making a comment at that time. But the committee moved so quickly that I wasn't able to raise the signal, but I understand that that person is still in the gallery. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As to the gallery questions, I have two questions, or rather two sections of questions from two participants in the gallery. I'll read out the first one and you can guide me on how you wish this to go. Philip Chamberlain, resident at 418 Parker Road in electoral area F, which is a property immediately adjacent to the subject property of Annex D, asks 4 questions on the content of the document. That on page 83, the document states highway and inquires that should it not say public road, as there is no designated provincial highway nearby. On page 84, should it not clearly state maximum total gross floor size, as the document is currently unclear if the reference is per floor or to the total of all floors. Figure 4 shows a visual buffer that includes a road allowance, as that may eventually be developed into a road shouldn't the road allowance be removed from the buffer calculation. And the final question on figure 4, there is a white area on the left-hand side of the map that is undefined. Is it green space or a future road dedication to connect Parker Road?
Okay. I know the answer to the first one, and I'm going to hand the rest of them off to staff. Anywhere where it says highway, it does not have to be a numbered named highway. That is the way that roads are referred to, even within the district of Sechelt. Everything is considered a highway. For whatever purpose in the legislation. Do staff want to address the other ones or correct me if I'm wrong?
Thank you, Chair. Staff would just say that those sound like excellent technical questions, and I note that our manager of planning has stepped away from the meeting for a moment, but staff can take a look at those, and we do have the window before the board would consider the committee's recommendation today. And should we identify that there's a need to bring forward more information, we could do that before the board makes that consideration. Thanks.
Perfect. But otherwise, the person's questions will be answered offline.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Second question from Sue Grayson of Earls Cove in electoral area A, who states she is the owner of the Cove restaurant immediately adjacent to the Earls Cove ferry terminal, and she asks regarding Annex P, the BC Ferries rezoning item, when will the public consultation occur? There are concerns locally with the potential for rezoning to enable building of a restaurant, retail spaces allowed for food trucks, etc. There has been no public consultation, no local consultation to this point, and as the owners of the restaurant next door to the terminal, we have concerns.
Sorry, what item was that in referral to?
I believe it's in reference to the late agenda item P. There is an APC report that contains, I believe, a BC Ferries rezoning.
Yes, recommendation 4 from the APC. Thank you. Was there anything that staff wanted to address in that?
Not in terms of a substantive answer, unfortunately, Chair. Just to say that that item is early in the process, and that staff take note of the question and will endeavor to include that information either in a forthcoming staff report or sooner if we have that information from BC Ferries. Thank you.
Okay.
There are no further questions.
And staff can follow up with that member of the community as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Director Lee.
Yes, I'm sorry I did miss that. I believe that GM Hall is absolutely right. I believe that the first step of this rezoning is for the proponent to consult with the public, and that's where we are in it. At some future time, there will be first, second, third readings and a public hearing. I probably got that wrong. It's probably first, second, and public hearing, but GM Hall could also correct me on that. So there will be, well, I'd like GM Hall to confirm that there will be a public hearing on this sometime in the future.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in accordance with the Local Government Act, there would be consideration of a public hearing following, well, before third reading, and staff can look further at the file to see if there's any additional consultation opportunities being contemplated. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. So now we are going to be going in camera, and that the public will be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with section 91A, and I will wait for IT to let us know that we're clear. That concludes our in-camera session. May I have a motion to adjourn? Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Great. Thank you very much. See you again in 12 minutes.